How awesome is this? The summer's here. NFL minicamps are getting underway this week. And you guys, well, you're starving for fantasy football knowledge. Guess what? We're here to feed you. I'm Jamie Eisenberg. That's Dave Richard. And that's Heath Cummings. This is a special edition of Fantasy Football Today. We are counting down our top 150 for 2019. Now, this list is going to change a million times from now until the start of the season. But it's the kickoff of our top 150 countdown today for the next hour. And all throughout the week, Monday through Friday, we'll be breaking it down until we get to number one, which hopefully will be a little bit of a surprise. But you can read about it all on CBS Sports, and you can listen to it on our CBS Sports Fantasy Football Today podcast. Gentlemen, how excited are you for the start of the summer, for the start of minicamps for Fantasy Football Today?
Man, I've been excited for this since last season ended. Won a couple of leagues, was feeling good about it, but missed setting my lineup, missed getting my waivers in order. I'm ready for this.
Oh, yeah, we've got everything. The nice thing is we've got the top 150. We don't have to do anything else until the season starts now. So we've already figured everything out. We're good to go.
We certainly have a lot to get to, and don't forget to check out our Fantasy Football magazine that will be on the newsstands very soon as well, in conjunction with Beckett Media. It should be a fun read for you to get yourself a little bit prepared, but we're going to have a little bit of a taste for you today, again, all throughout the week. Let's get to the start of this list, 150 to 141, and the first topic we're going to take on here is something that a lot of people, I think, will be interested in. As you see this list here, starting with Duke Johnson at 150, ending with Trey Burton at 141. A lot of these guys are going to be your late-round flyers, guys you take some chances on, sleepers, guys that you think can have an opportunity to break out this season in some regard, and some of these players fall at the quarterback position. As you see, several guys on this list here with Dak Prescott at 149, Big Ben at 144, we'll show Phillip Rivers as well at 143. We're going to tie in a few other players at this position just because we want to kind of get to some topics here and not necessarily go by the names on the list. But when I think you look at Russell Wilson and somebody who we'll show in one of the coming lists, he's at 128, Kyler Murray also at 138. But you look at these quarterbacks here, these are the guys that you kind of wait for on draft day. We talk about it all the time. Wait for quarterbacks, and we know what that position brings and what it means to you. There's Russell Wilson, 128, Kyler Murray, 138. You know what these guys are able to do. Roethlisberger last year, the number 3 quarterback in fantasy. Rivers, the number 10 quarterback. Wilson, number 7. How much does this say wait on the position, Heath?
Well, I think it definitely says wait on the position. The interesting thing will be in your league, who are you able to wait for? Because Russell Wilson has been one of the best quarterbacks in fantasy over the last 5 years. And even last year was able to give us a top 7 season, even if it wasn't in the most sustainable way, and he is in the most run-heavy offense in the NFL. So I would expect we're going to see Russell Wilson. I think I'm dragging this number down a little bit. We're going to see Russell Wilson go somewhere in the first 10 rounds, and I'm not going to have any interest in that.
I understand why. He's outside of my top 12 as well. Seattle, fewest pass attempts in the NFL, in line with what you said there about their rush attempts leading the NFL in rushing. Dave, you're obviously the highest guy on Russell Wilson. No Doug Baldwin, as we know, changing the receiving core with Baldwin gone and the addition of DK Metcalf and Gary Jennings. What do you like about Russell Wilson so much that he's still in your top 10?
Well, let's just start with the track record. He's given you at least 34 touchdowns 3 of the last 4 seasons. He's been top 5 in consistency each of the last 2 years. Top 8 finish 3 of the last 4 years. He was quarterback number 1 in 2016. I think he's in line to throw a little bit more than we're giving him credit for. I know that this offense, we look at what Pete Carroll wants to do. He wants to run the football. They drafted DK Metcalf for a reason. The Seahawks even said as much. They want to throw the ball downfield, and Russell Wilson is good at that. So is he going to have to be efficient to come back as a top 10 fantasy quarterback? Yeah, but he'll do it. I like getting him before round 10, round 8, round 9. Perfect time to steal him from the rest of the league.
Yeah, I do. I think it's hard to believe he won't throw more than he did last year, because he threw 427 pass attempts. No one is going, I wouldn't project anyone to throw that little in 2019, but DK Metcalf, there's a lot of questions to be answered about him in terms of whether he knows what routes he's supposed to be running. And sure, he can go deep once or twice a game, and it'll be wide open because they've only thrown the ball 18 times so far. But the other problem for me with Wilson was, with as much as they ran, he didn't see his production in the running game go up. They tried to keep him a little bit closer, and he really only threw when he had to. It's possible. He made me look stupid numerous times last year when I'd have him ranked 15th through 18th because I only thought he was going to throw 22 passes. and he'd throw 22 passes and throw 3 touchdowns. So he can do that. I wouldn't want to bet on that over a full season happening again.
As I wrote in his player outlook, he's one of those guys that could be a top 5 guy, like you kind of are leaning toward. He's one of those guys. But still, I mean, he has top 5 potential. You said he's done it before, and obviously that's the case. And there's also the chance that he falls outside of the top 10 just because of that volume, if in fact it does not lead to the efficiency that we saw last season. Kyler Murray's another guy that has a lot of upside. I would actually take Kyler Murray ahead of Russell Wilson, the rookie from Oklahoma, now the #1 overall pick to Arizona. Has so much potential. Over 4,000 yards passing in Oklahoma last season to win the Heisman Trophy. Over 1,000 rushing yards. Only 2 quarterbacks in NCAA history have done that, Deshaun Watson being the other one in 2015, and we know that he's been a very good fantasy quarterback. You're hearing word out of Arizona. They're talking about maybe him as the next Patrick Mahomes. Let's pump the brakes on that yet, because I don't think he's going to throw for 5,000 yards and go for 50 touchdowns. But if he plays like he played Oklahoma, we could be talking about a top 3 fantasy quarterback. Again, that's being very overly optimistic, but as you see here, this is where Kyler Murray comes in. Heath, again, the negative guy on what we can see from him in terms of Kyler Murray. Dave, not as optimistic as me. I'm clearly the high guy on Kyler Murray. I will always draft for upside at the quarterback spot, but Heath, again, why are you so down on Kyler Murray?
I'm looking forward to the guys we can talk about that I like more than everyone else, so I can say positive things. No, I think there is a lot of upside for Kyler Murray. Comparing him to Patrick Mahomes is not fair to him at all, and comparing his situation is also not fair just because he doesn't have the weapons yet at wide receiver. They've got a lot of new options there. Hakeem Butler, Andy Isabella. He's got Christian Kirk. He's got Larry Fitzgerald. That's not Tyreek Hill, Travis Kelce, Sammy Watkins, Kareem Hunt. So I think this first year may be a little bit of an adjustment period, and there's some serious risk with his size and that offensive line. He's got upside. I don't mind him in a 2-quarterback league. I don't think he's going to be startable in a 1-quarterback league.
Look, I know he's as small as an ant, but he's going to be outstanding out there. This is my DFS quarterback in week 1 when he takes on the Lions at home, because he's going to be outstanding. As far as the whole season goes, I actually agree with you, Jamie. I think he's got huge upside. He might have more upside than any other player that we will draft this summer after pick 100 overall. I like the idea. If I'm waiting on quarterback and if I don't feel like I'm getting a steal with, say, Russell Wilson in round 9 or round 10, you wouldn't do that, but I would. I'll wait and I'll get Kyler Murray in round 10, maybe even round 11 if he's there and you're not drafting with me. And then I'll get a veteran quarterback behind him, and I might even start the veteran quarterback a couple of times in the first few weeks of the season. But I think he's somebody that's got huge upside, and I do think he's worthy of being drafted. A lot of rookie quarterbacks, we can't even say that about in fantasy football. He should be drafted. He should be drafted ahead of guys like, and this is going to sound crazy, Tom Brady, Ben Roethlisberger. Yes, he should be.
I think he's next.
Because that upside is there for him. He's got it.
So good transition, Dave. Big Ben at 144 on this list. Again, Kyler Murray at 138. So consensus, we have Murray ahead of Big Ben. I know, Heath, you don't agree with that. Roethlisberger last year, Steelers led the NFL in pass attempts. I know this is where you're going because the Seahawks last in pass attempts, the Steelers first. Something missing, though, from the Steelers offense.
Sure.
Jesse James. We know that he is gone, but also Antonio Brown, obviously, no longer part of this roster. You see here, Dave and I, obviously not in the Big Ben camp. You still very much are. And again, I understand why. If they're going to find a way to replace AB's production and the volume, he could still be a very good fantasy quarterback. But again, losing all of what Antonio Brown brings to the table, it's a little hard for me to stomach.
Yeah, that's going to hurt his efficiency. I actually, though I have him 7th, gave him pretty significant drops in both his touchdown rate and his yards per attempt. But I really like his situation with the offensive coordinator, Ben Roethlisberger, who just called his own number constantly. 675 pass attempts for him last year. We're talking about 250 more throws than Russell Wilson. And I don't know that that's necessarily going to change very much. I think Juju gets 180 targets. Hopefully somebody steps up as a number 2 wide receiver in this offense. It's not going to do what Antonio Brown did, but he can throw it 650 times at less efficiency and still be a top 10 guy.
I'm with you on the hopefully, but it's a hopefully, and I think that's part of what the Steelers are
we
trying
were just
to
talking about Kyler Murray.
Well, again, though, I think you're looking at what the system is there, and part of Kyler Murray is what the defense is going to look like in Arizona, and part of it for Big Ben is what the defense is going to look like in Pittsburgh, because last year the defense was horrible, and that's not usually what Pittsburgh wants to be. They've addressed some of the holes that they have on defense, trading up in the first round to get Devin Bush, trying to fix some things and correct some of those problems. And I think if that happens, then they don't want Big Ben, the offensive coordinator, to call Big Ben the quarterback throwing as much as they did.
Somebody's going to tell Big Ben the offensive quarterback.
Well, I think, look, Ben is also a guy that has won without throwing very much in the past and still gotten his numbers to a decent level, which is kind of what I expect. I would actually love a Big Ben Kyler Murray pairing. If I'm drafting Kyler Murray, I would love to get a veteran guy who I know I can get good production from, maybe great, but at least I know what I'm getting. And so that's kind of the pairing I think you want to do if you do draft Kyler Murray. And maybe conversely, if you draft Big Ben and you want to get somebody with who could have, at least probably in your opinion, more upside in Kyler Murray.
And Kyler Murray, you both forgot about this. He's going to run the ball a heck of a lot more than Ben Roethlisberger will. Listen to this. Last
Ben
year,
calls himself running plays.
Well, that might be a couple of touchdowns, but I don't think Roethlisberger's going to run for more than 5 yards per game. Last year, 22% of his receptions, 25% of the yards, 44% of the touchdowns went to Antonio Brown. And if you think that's crazy, the year before that, 26% of the catches, 33% of the yards, 28% of the touchdowns all went to Antonio Brown. How do you replace that? You can't just shove all that in Juju's lap. We don't know if James Washington's going to step up. Same thing with Deontay Johnson, Dante Moncrief, and Vance McDonald. Rather, I'm not convinced that Ben Roethlisberger is going to have a good year for fantasy purposes. Might win a lot of games for the Steelers, but I don't see him having a lot of big 25, 30-point games for us.
I'll just have you know he averaged 6 yards per game on the ground last year. So he's already,
there you go. That
he's
extra
already
yard
beat your expectations.
That extra yard. Decimal scoring, who knows? That could end up coming back to help you a little bit. Dak Prescott's the next guy we're going to look at here. Prescott comes in at 149, just barely getting in to the top 150. But last year, things changed for him. Started the season not as a great fantasy quarterback, comes back and has a strong finish because of the trade to acquire Amari Cooper. So he has Cooper. He gets his favorite security blanket back in Jason Witten coming out of the broadcast booth to come back to the field. They add Randall Cobb, Michael Gallup, hopefully in the second season. I also think very underrated in terms of additions for him is another guy coming back. That's Travis Frederick, the center. Hopefully he's healthy after missing all of last season with an illness. So Prescott has a lot of things in front of him. But what's the upside for Dak Prescott? That's my concern for him is can he be a 25-plus point scorer on a consistent basis in an offense that does want to run the ball with Ezekiel Elliott. So I'm probably the lowest guy on Dak. I do think he's a great sleeper for 2019. I have no problem waiting for him as a lot of other quarterbacks you could find late on draft day, but I just don't know where the upside lies with him. Dave, are you on the Dak Prescott train here?
Not exactly. He's been top 13 each year that he's played, but he's never been consistent. And that's the one thing that you want to look for from a fantasy quarterback is somebody who more weeks than not can get you 22, 25, 30-plus fantasy points, especially when you're drafting late and there's so many guys out there that have that type of week-to-week potential. You want to be able to find that from them. I do think they're going to try and throw the ball a little bit more than they have in the past. Kellen Moore, the new offensive coordinator, is somebody that I'm excited about in Dallas, but I don't know if that translates to Dak Prescott having a big year. There are so many other quarterbacks out there, Jamie, that are just so much more appealing for fantasy purposes, even Kyler Murray ahead of Dak Prescott.
I just think if you look at the second half of what he did once Amari Cooper got there, he was on pace for 4,400 yards passing. He scored 30. He was on pace for 32 touchdowns. That's plenty of upside for a quarterback.
I just look at it this way with Dak, that this defense is going to be as good, if not better, than what it was a year ago, and it was building towards something pretty special, with what their pass rush was, bringing Lawrence back, Van Der Esch, Jalen Smith, the linebacking core that they have there, the secondary is fantastic. I just feel like Dallas is one of those teams. I know the new offensive coordinator is going to change some things. It's still Jason Garrett, Jerry Jones, and this whole, tier and umbrella of what the Cowboys are, that it's run the ball first and not necessarily put Dak in situations where he has to win games for them. So Dak feels to me like Russell Wilson.
Except he threw the ball 100 times more last year.
Yeah, I don't think he's going to throw the ball as few times as Russell Wilson does, but I don't think it's going to be in the Roethlisberger range. So I'm just a little bit concerned about the pass volume for Dak. That's kind of originally when I did my first quarter, he was like in that 11 to 13 range. But the more I think about the Cowboys, it's like where's their offensive structure lie? And I think it's more with Ezekiel Elliott than it is with Dak Prescott. Plus, they have to make some decisions on how they're going to pay all these guys, which should be a fun thing to figure out. The NFL guys. For the fantasy guys, we're looking at Phillip Rivers, who was a top 10 quarterback last year. Seems to always be in that top 10, top 12 range. He's just Mr. Consistent. Tailed off at the end of last season, but still a very strong campaign. Heath, not necessarily liking Phillip Rivers as much, which I'm surprised, just given what his volume should be. Dave still has him as a top 12 guy. I'm just outside at number 14. So, Heath, what's the problem with Phillip Rivers?
I'm actually concerned about the volume. I think he's still very good, and probably the right place to rank Phillip Rivers is one spot of wherever his ADP is, because he always outperforms what his ADP is. But he did only throw the ball 508 times last year, and I think this defense, if everyone's healthy, I think this defense is going to be pretty good. So I'm just a little bit worried. He's kind of in that Russell Wilson range of quarterbacks that I think are very good. You're not going to feel bad starting them in fantasy, but I'm not sure the volume will be there for them to have enormous upside.
All he's done is finish as a top 12 quarterback each of the last 6 years, and if that's not good enough for you, how about top 10 each of the last 3 years? And when you're drafting Phillip Rivers, it's going to be late in the draft, so maybe you're streaming your quarterback. He's gotten off to a hot start each of the last 5 seasons. Last year alone, 20 or more fantasy points. This is 6 point per passing touchdown leagues, 6 of 7 games. So he is the perfect quarterback to just wait and wait and wait and then begin the season with as a streamer. You can get him and Kyler Murray. Maybe you're not so convinced on Kyler Murray. You start Phillip Rivers for the first 3 or 4 weeks of the season. Then you go to Murray once Phillip Rivers starts to slide at the midpoint of the year.
It's funny. If I were to take something from this, I would say you're going based on numbers in terms of pass volume. For and against. You're liking the consistency of several guys, Russell Wilson, Phillip Rivers, and at least for me with Kyler Murray as the best example, I'm looking for the most upside of these guys. So very different approach for how we're taking these quarterbacks, at least with these late round guys. Let's recap what we started with here, 150 to 141. We went through a lot of the quarterback scenarios here of some guys that you'll see also in these upcoming lists. One guy I wanted to mention, I think we probably are all in some level of agreement. Justice Hill is worth a late round flyer just based on the volume of what the Ravens and how they like to run the ball. And if Mark Ingram does get hurt, we could see Justice Hill in maybe a little bit more of a prominent role. One guy that's not on the list, you just heard Casey Kiernan talk about Terrell Pryor signs with the Jaguars. Real quick, any interest in Terrell Pryor?
No, none.
Not at all.
Not at all. There you have it. We'll talk about some Jaguars receivers coming up. And as we now unveil list number 140 to 131 here, a lot of interesting fantasy options on this list. One of them being Kareem Hunt. You saw Duke Johnson on the other list at number 150. Hunt, as we know, 8-game suspension. We don't need to get into why he's suspended. That's something for another conversation here. But he's going to miss the first 8 games, not eligible to play until Week 10 because of the Browns bye week. He was cut by Kansas City last season, signed with the Browns. Browns GM John Dorsey has a relationship with Hunt going back to their days in Kansas City. Hunt, when he's been on the field, has been an unbelievable fantasy option. Last year was the number 12 PPR running back despite playing in just 11 games, averaged 20.8 PPR points per game. Just amazing production on the field with the Chiefs. In 2017, when he led the NFL in rushing, averaged 18.4 fantasy points per game. That's in PPR. But again, with the suspension, with a shared backfield with Duke Johnson, and as we know, they're sharing as the backup because Nick Chubb is the starter and hopefully will be the guy for 16 games. But we don't know what's going to happen when Kareem Hunt is back on the field. So let's get into this Browns topic here. Dave, I'll start with you. Your thoughts on the guys playing behind Nick Chubb are what?
This is going to sound funny. I don't want either one of them. And it has nothing to do with anything off the field. It's strictly their situations. We know that Duke Johnson, for the first 8 games of the season, will probably be a backup to Nick Chubb. How did that work out for Duke Johnson last year? Nick Chubb had almost 20 touches per game on average. Chubb was awesome in that spot. And then when Kareem Hunt is back off the suspended list, I would imagine Duke Johnson is going to become a special teamer. And Kareem Hunt will be the backup, but we don't know how much he's going to play. Will it be 5 to 7 touches per game? Will he split 50-50? You are guaranteed nothing with Kareem Hunt. I value my bench space. I don't want to have somebody on my bench that's going to sit there and hog up a spot for the first 9 weeks of the fantasy season. That's most of the regular season. So I'm going to let somebody else draft Kareem Hunt in my leagues, and if I need him later on, I'll pick him up off waivers because someone will drop him for someone that they need off of a bye week.
But in terms of Duke Johnson, let's just say Nick Chubb has a sophomore slump, gets hurt, whatever the case may be. We love this Browns offense. I mean, you know, Baker Mayfield's in our top 10 in some capacity. Odell Beckham's obviously a star. Jarvis Landry, David Njoku's. A lot to like about what Freddie Kitchens and Todd Monken throw out there.
It's a lot of names.
If Chubb does miss time due to injury in those first 8 games, could Duke Johnson go back to what he was 2 years ago and maybe be a starting fantasy option?
I actually have Duke Johnson ranked ahead of Kareem Hunt because I do think that Dave's right, that it's most likely, at least in a league that has 5 bench spots, the guy that drafts Kareem Hunt may not have Kareem Hunt on his team. And I think that the most likely situation is, and hopefully it's what happens, Kareem Hunt doesn't make an impact this year because Nick Chubb's just awesome. But I would rather have Johnson on my team just because if something happens the first 6 to 8 weeks, you might actually benefit from it. It could be very frustrating to be that Kareem Hunt owner, see Nick Chubb get hurt, miss 2 weeks in the middle, and then be ready for week 9 when Hunt can actually play.
And in terms of Johnson, you mentioned his production last year was a little bit struggling. There were 3 guys there last year as well. Carlos Hyde was there to start the season, so Johnson was trying to find his way, but he did score only 3 touchdowns, career low in terms of 40 carries. But going to be interesting to see how fantasy owners approach this Browns backfield on based on average draft position to see how these guys go. I would actually still take Kareem Hunt over Duke Johnson, but that's in the league that has a little bit deeper bench spots. 5 bench spots is I would only 5 bench spots. I would only take Duke Johnson. All right, let's look now at the next list that we're talking about here, and that is 130 to 121. And on this list are some very, I would say, exciting backup running backs, guys that have a chance to potentially be very impactful for your fantasy roster this season. We're going to get into that in just a moment, but you see some of the names on this list. Albert Wilson at the top. Hopefully he's healthy with his hip injury from a year ago. We're going to talk about some of the rookie wide receivers, DK Metcalf and Deebo Samuel coming up. But I want to start here with the Rams running back situation because we know it could be very, very dicey depending on what Todd Gurley's status is. He had the knee injury at the end of last season, missed the final 2 games, came back for the playoffs, had a very strong game against the Cowboys, but then just completely fell apart in the NFC Championship game and the Super Bowl, combined for only 45 yards rushing in those 2 games. And the Rams go out and they draft Darrell Henderson. They bring back Malcolm Brown, who was their backup before C.J. Anderson came on last year. Brown suffered an injury at the end of last season, wasn't able to finish, so they signed C.J. Anderson off the street. So Gurley's got the opportunity to hopefully be fine. I think it's kind of the same thing. We hope Nick Chubb is great. We hope Todd Gurley is fantastic because he's been among the best fantasy running backs of the past 2 seasons. But if, in fact, this knee injury is a problem or we do start to see a workload decrease, how good could Darrell Henderson be?
He could be amazing.
Oh,
where was he on this list? Like 125th, somewhere like that?
He won't be 125.
No, what's today's date? It's like June 3rd, something like that. So later on, when we get to July and August, he's going to be rising up those rankings. He's a top 100 player. Just picture this in
I
your
don't
head.
know about that.
Picture this in your head. Alvin Kamara being coached by Sean McVay. What would that look like? Because that's what this is going to be.
I don't think that's what this is going to be.
That's what this is going to be. He is going to be very good in this offense.
Heath, are you still confident in Todd Gurley?
I'm not still confident in Todd Gurley. I'm also not confident, especially on June 3rd, that if something happens to Todd Gurley, it's immediately Darrell Henderson. Because I do think they brought back Malcolm Brown for a reason. Someone else wanted to add Malcolm Brown to their team, and they had to make the decision to keep him.
Before the draft.
Before the draft. I do think Henderson's the most talented back. I also thought Rashad Penny was the most talented back in Seattle going into last year. He's got some things to prove, and I don't see this as a situation where we don't have Todd Gurley. It seems like they're going to have Todd Gurley on the field. They're going to give him, an uneducated guess, 15 touches a game. And then one of these other backs, probably Henderson by week 4 or 5, is doing the other part of that offense. But they spread things around so much. I don't think he's going to be an Alvin Kamara type talent.
I mean, the one thing, well, his numbers in college were amazing. Over 2,000 total yards, 25 touchdowns. This was last year at Memphis, back-to-back years of averaging over 8 yards per carry. So he has the potential to be a star. And the hope would be, like you said, Dave, is that McVay gets his hands on him. This is really if Todd Gurley is going to miss significant time. Because I think if Gurley is right, then Henderson is going to be probably in the Kareem Hunt role of someone that's going to get cut early in the season, or at least if you're not the Todd Gurley owner, you're not going to want to hold on to him if Gurley's doing.
Or like the Duke Johnson role.
20 touches
might be
per game.
Duke Johnson.
Right. So you could be a little bit frustrated as a Darrell Henderson owner. But if you are drafting him early in the process, because Gurley's not going to play in the preseason, Gurley's not going to show you very much, you're not going to know how healthy this knee situation is. If, in fact, we find out right before the season Gurley's on the pup list, if, in fact, he's not right, they're trying to save him for the playoffs.
Well, then you won.
Saving him for the playoffs in September. That would
No, but I mean, just in terms of, ramping up his work as we get to October and November, they're not going to obviously not play him until the playoffs. But I think it could be a situation where Darrell Henderson could be one of these league winners for you.
I couldn't agree more. I love his speed, especially for a guy his size. He hasn't played with that type of physicality, but he's a good pass catcher out of the backfield. And there are comparisons to Kamara, maybe not even in terms of size. He's a bigger guy than AK. So I think that when you get him right around 100th overall, and you have to do it if you draft Todd Gurley, he's definitely gonna pay off some benefits this year. He'll be a 10 touch per game guy at some point during the year.
And for those of you that are still doing your rookie only free agent drafts, in dynasty leagues, Henderson is a first round pick. I think he's crept his way now into that conversation. He started really an early second round pick, but now I've seen him go as high as number 4 overall.
Right.
I mean, that's just how people are valuing him if you are devaluing Todd Gurley. Some other running backs that we talked about that we showed you on this list, guys who could be impactful in 2019 that could be backups to start the season but starters by the time the year ends. Jamal Williams has already done that twice. Royce Freeman expected to be the starter last year, ended up as the backup behind Phillip Lindsay. You're hearing all sorts of glowing things coming out of Tampa Bay about Ronald Jones. Hopefully that happens. Then you have some clear-cut backups, but guys that have the chance, if some injuries occur, in Kalen Ballage and Alexander Madison, to be fantasy relevant. And yes, his name is Alexander Madison. Let's start with Jamal Williams, who at the end of last season took over for an injured Aaron Jones. In the final 3 games of the season, Williams averaged 16.7 fantasy points per game. That's in PPR. He had the same thing happen to him in 2017 when Jones missed time. But they did add another guy in the 6th round with Dexter Williams. What do you think about Jamal Williams?
I hope that he doesn't matter that much this year because I hope they decide to give Aaron Jones a feature role. But they have talked about using 2 backs. If that keeps Jones healthy, I think the most likely situation for Jamal Williams is he's somebody at the beginning of the year you can't use at all because he's a backup running back to Aaron Jones and getting maybe 5 to 10 touches per game. There will be a 2 or 3 week stretch where Jones goes down with some sort of minor injury and Williams is a starter and everybody's rushing to the waiver wire to add him, and then Jones comes back and we can't use Williams at all again.
I don't know how good he is. I know late last season when he had that volume, he turned out to be just fine for fantasy purposes. But I wouldn't be surprised if Dexter Williams gives him a push in training camp. We know that Aaron Jones should be the guy. And I think the coaching staff is going to get on board with him. Apparently, he's lost a little bit of weight. He's got some better definition.
Jones. Yes.
Aaron Jones has. Jamal Williams has been the bigger guy. So I wonder if it's more equal now between those two. So I'm more excited about Jones, and I'd like to see how Dexter Williams does. I'm not interested in drafting Jamal Williams.
Yep. I mean, he's in this range for a reason, clearly, and he's at least as of now the handcuff to Aaron Jones. At least I think we would agree on that. Dexter Williams could clearly push him in training camp. Royce Freeman could open the season as the starter. Look, Philip Lindsay's expected to be fine. Hopefully he is, but he's coming off a significant wrist injury. I've seen him now twice. I saw him at the Super Bowl, saw him at the Pro Bowl. He was there just to kind of take in the experience. But he had a cast on his wrist. He's got that off now. Hopefully everything is going to be fine with that flexor injury that he did suffer. Missed Week 17 last year. Freeman was a star in that game in Week 17, but Freeman had a rough time last year. He was expected to be the guy, was the rookie that the Broncos actually drafted. Lindsay was an undrafted rookie free agent. He had 5 games with double digits in touches last year. He only averaged 9.6 PPR points per game. So Freeman's got a lot of work to do before fantasy players can trust him. I'm assuming you guys feel the same way.
This is a good situation. I think the Denver Broncos should have a good run offense. I don't think Freeman has the same upside if he gets the job that Lindsay does, because I'm not sure he's going to do as much in the passing game, and it turns
8
into
catches,
a situation.
though, Week 17.
He did have 8 catches in that game. I would expect it to be more of a Devontae Booker's playing again if it's Royce Freeman and Booker at the start of the year. But I do think he's somebody you look at the end of the draft that has more upside than most of the other backs on this list.
I don't think he's got a lot of upside. I think he has some upside. I've got him ranked too low. He should be a little bit higher. But he's, again, one of these running backs that you're going to take round 12 plus. Maybe you pair him with Philip Lindsay. And that's pretty much it. There is upside. There is potential there because we saw him coming out of Oregon. He was a good player then.
He was one of the guys. I mean, 2 guys on this list, Ronald Jones and Royce Freeman. As we talk, we could bring in Ronald Jones now. 2 guys that were like, you got to get these guys. These are 2 high, prominent rookies. It was Saquon Barkley, and then who's number 2? And it was, I think you like Jones initially coming out of the draft.
I was crazy about him.
Freeman was one of my guys. I don't know where you fell in terms of these 2 guys. You were probably smart enough to take, the third guy, whoever the 4th guy, whoever that was. But Jones is somebody that it's an open backfield for the Bucs because Peyton Barber, I think we could all agree, is kind of just a guy. Filled the role last year, didn't fill it very well. They didn't really bring in a lot of talent. They have an undrafted rookie free agent. I know you like a lot, Heath, and that's Bruce Anderson, and we'll see if Anderson has an opportunity to win that job. I spoke to a Tampa Bay beat writer who said Anderson could be the starter. He could be cut by the time we get to Week 1.
That same go for Ronald Jones?
I don't think they're going to cut Ronald Jones just yet. And if you hear Jameis Winston and what he said, I think it was last week during their voluntary workouts, he said he's getting comfortable. And so hopefully the new offense with Bruce Arians will help Ronald Jones step up. We do have Peyton Barber as a consensus ranked higher. We'll get to that throughout the week. But right now, Ronald Jones is the guy we're talking about. Can he be a breakout running back in 2019?
Could be. I mean, but that's what we were saying about him at this time. Well, it's because this time last year, look, I got burned by him, and then he ended up, it actually worked out because he was so bad by the preseason that everybody was off the bandwagon, and then he just couldn't recover. It was a confidence issue for him, and it was also a blocking issue. That offensive line didn't do him any favors.
Yeah.
If that offensive line has its act together now, and it better in Tampa Bay, then yeah, he could have some potential. He's got some upside as a pass catcher, and he's got speed. It's just got to put it all together, and it starts up here with him.
I do think he has upside because of his talent, but I think what I said last year was he can't catch and he can't block, and it's hard to play on 3rd down when you can't do either of those things.
Small hands, too, I think.
I think he has small hands, and last year he didn't really run very well either, and there's not very many other things for a running back to do on a football field besides those 3 things. There have been positive reports coming out of camp so far, and so if that continues throughout the summer, I might open my eyes to the possibility a little bit, but he was terrible last year.
So right now, if I understand it correctly, you're going to pass on Barber, you can pass on Jones, just take a later-round flyer on Bruce Anderson. If you're looking at the Bucs backfield.
There are certain formats where Ronald Jones is being drafted ahead of Peyton Barber. Peyton Barber's best ball ADP, I think, right now is around 150.
Sure.
So I'm taking Peyton Barber there happily. But yes, for the most part, I'd rather just spend a last-round pick on Bruce Anderson.
Yep, and we'll see how that works out. Again, the Broncos situation, as we sort of tie these 2 together, nobody was looking at Philip Lindsay as anything. Even Philip Lindsay told me himself, he's like, I was just hoping to play on special teams. He ends up as the Broncos starting running back by the time we get to the season. 2 other guys here just want to take a quick look at. Kalen Ballage, Alexander Madison. I think both you guys are higher on Madison than Ballage, right?
Dalvin Cook's missed 17 games the last 2 seasons, and he's missed a game by the first week of October each of the last 2 years. So you draft Alexander Madison, you wait for Dalvin Cook to get hurt, and then you've got the lead back for Minnesota, theoretically.
I actually have Ballage ranked higher than Madison. I have Ballage ranked, I think, higher than every running back we've talked about in this section, just because of the opportunity in Miami. Right. The new head coach did not talk as if he wants to use Kenyon Drake as a feature back. I think they should. I think Drake's very good. But if Drake's going to be a third down back, there's a chance that Kalen Ballage is a 200-touch back this year.
He very well could be. And the Dolphins did bring in a couple of running backs, but they took them with late-round picks. So it could be the Kalen Ballage show. I would be surprised if that's the case, but I understand where you're coming from. Same thing with Madison. I would take Ballage over Madison as well. I just don't think Alexander Madison, his name is Alexander Madison, is a very good running back.
Just you wait.
And that will show up in the NFL. Just you wait to see two guys who like to take their shirts.
Wow, man, I would take my shirt off too. What's up, man? How you doing? You all right? You don't have to listen to him, man. You don't have to listen to him. Yeah! Let's go. Hey, make sure you get that on film, pal. Make sure you get that on film. Pretty good. Looking pretty good, man.
So there's DK Metcalf with his shirt off, and I know this next guy that's going to join us is probably going to take his shirt off as well. Let's bring in our good buddy, our podcast host, Adam Azer. Adam, what are you doing? You're wearing clothes, bud.
Yeah, it's really embarrassing. Like, I can deal with not looking like DK Metcalf, but like Pete Carroll, he's like 70, right? Like, I am embarrassed to be seen next to Pete Carroll with my shirt off. So, yeah, I kept it on for today's show. You're welcome, everybody.
Well, thank you, Adam. I think we all would be embarrassed probably standing next to Pete Carroll as well. We're counting down our top 150 players here on CBS Sports HQ. I'm Jamie. That's Dave. That's Heath. Again, that's Adam Azer, our podcast host. We will be also breaking down our top 150 on our Fantasy Football Today podcast. You want to download that on iTunes and listen to it wherever podcasts are found. At least that's what the other hosts say when they're up on this show. So, Adam, we've been breaking down. We're up to our final list here, 130 to 121. Let's show that again so everybody can take a look here. We started at 150. We're down to 121 here. We just got through talking about some of the running backs, Ballage, Jones, Freeman, Henderson, a lot of exciting players there. And now we're going to get into a couple of rookie wide receivers. You see Deebo Samuel and DK Metcalf on this list. And I think both guys have a lot of upside. Metcalf is clearly somebody that's going to impact the Seattle offense now that Doug Baldwin is gone. Samuel, another rookie that the 49ers drafted, could be maybe their number one wide receiver based on what happened a year ago. Metcalf, not exactly the best of route runners as we've seen here during their voluntary mini camps. Not exactly doing a great job in terms of what could be a big problem for him as you see here as he's trying to run what looks to be a dig route. Not exactly digging very hard. Ugh. Hard to watch there. So, Adam, what do you think about DK Metcalf here and what his outlook could be for 2019 with Baldwin gone? He's got to help replace a lot of production here for the Seahawks.
I dig him. I actually think. Yeah, thank you. So when you look at these two guys, I think this might be a standard scoring versus PPR scoring type of thing. It's going to be hard for me to see DK Metcalf getting a ton of catches, but I think when you look at Tyler Lockett has 19 career touchdowns, and 6 of them have been from inside 20 yards. There is a huge void to fill in the red zone for the Seattle Seahawks, and that is such an obvious place where DK Metcalf can make his mark. Russell Wilson basically throws 34 or 35 touchdowns every season. I don't know how he does it, but he does it. And DK Metcalf's going to catch some of them, going to catch a lot of them. I think he's going to lead the team in touchdowns, and I think he's going to be really good in non-PPR. In PPR, he might be pretty frustrating, but I do like DK Metcalf. I don't know that we've seen a wide receiver prospect quite like him, just in terms of where mock drafts had him, where draft analysts had him ranked. It really seemed to go all over the board there, and I'm really interested to see what we get from him.
Baldwin last year, 50 catches, 618 yards, and 5 touchdowns on 73 targets. Metcalf at Ole Miss, 26 catches, 569 yards, and 5 touchdowns, but only played in 7 games. I'm obviously the high guy on DK Metcalf, which is surprising because I'm the low guy. I'm not the low guy, but I'm with you a little bit on Russell Wilson. So you agree with Adam? Is it more non-PPR, PPR thing? Can he score a bunch of touchdowns? You love Russell Wilson. He's got to get production from somewhere.
Well, I think he's going to mix and match all over the offense, and that's where he's going to get his numbers from, because that's what he does pretty much every single year. I don't think DK Metcalf will be that guy. I understand where Adam's coming from. But these are both wide receivers that you're going to take with a late-round pick. You're going to hope to get a fast start from them, and if not, you're going to cut them. I think there's a better chance that Deebo Samuel delivers sooner than DK Metcalf will. The route running, the fact that he'll catch a lot of passes, he's got a clearer path to starting. Deebo Samuel is where I'm going.
Well, I don't know if he has a clearer path to starting.
I think he does.
So you're basically saying they drafted...
I'm not convinced that DK Metcalf is going to be a starter right away. They go purely on training camp competition. It could be Jennings, it could be Ursula. You like David Moore. We've talked about Jerron Brown too. I know that there's bigger capital in DK Metcalf in Seattle. It doesn't mean he's going to play. Once upon a time, they drafted Rashad Penny with a first-round pick, and it was Chris Carson that ended up taking that job right away.
I think DK Metcalf might have a slightly easier path to starting. I think Dante Pettis has an easier path to like 100.
Samuel.
Deebo Samuel like 120 targets. Because I don't think DK Metcalf, even if everyone else got hurt, I'm not sure that he can run all those routes that he needs to run in his rookie year. I do think long-term, the upside is maybe the best receiver in fantasy. He's going to have some games. I love him in best ball, where he goes for 3 catches, 120 yards, and scores 2 touchdowns probably. I don't think over the long haul in a regular redraft league where you have to choose when to start guys, DK Metcalf is someone I want on my roster.
My ranking of Metcalf is based on the touchdowns. I don't agree with Adam that he's going to lead the team in touchdowns, but I could see 8 touchdowns. I could see 50 catches. I think 800 yards, and I think he's going to end up being as a guy that you sort of mix and match with. Look, Tyler Lockett was basically the number. He was a number 16 PPR receiver last year, and he didn't catch a lot of passes either. Fewest targets among the guys in the top 30.
I'm right there with you almost, except for on the touch. I've got him for 49, 730, and 5 touchdowns.
Yeah, I mean,
so it's just whether he scores 8 touchdowns.
It's going to be the touchdown. Samuel is an interesting one, just based on what his opportunity is. Do you know who, Adam, I'll start with you, the leading receiver for the 49ers was last year?
Other than Kittle?
Other than Kittle.
Kendrick Bourne, was it?
Kendrick Bourne led the 49ers in receptions last year with 42 catches, 487 yards on 66 targets. It was terrible.
Yeah, and no wide receiver had 500 yards. So there's real opportunity there. Now, look, Pettis got hurt at the end of the year. Pettis was really coming on strong, and we love Dante Pettis. But certainly there's an opportunity here for Deebo Samuel, who it's easy to forget. He was the 3rd wide receiver off the board in the NFL draft, very early in the 2nd round. So that's pedigree right there. But I still prefer Metcalf, but I do see opportunity for both of these guys.
Yep, and they also drafted Jalen Hurd, and Marquise Goodwin will hopefully be back and be at 100% for the season. We'll see how this 49ers receiving core unfolds with Jimmy Garoppolo back. Some tight ends that we're looking at here that could be some breakout guys, and some guys that, you know, have the opportunity here that you can get with late-round picks. There's another position we tell you to wait on if you don't get one of the elite guys, and here are some tight ends in this grouping. Hockenson at 131, McDonald at 135, Herndon and Burton also rounding out this list. So let's start with Vance McDonald. The Steelers have a lot of production to replace with both Antonio Brown and Jesse James gone. That's 207 targets, 134 catches, 1,720 yards, and 17 touchdowns. It's a lot last time I checked. So, Adam, you look at Vance McDonald here. Is he somebody that you would target as a potential starter if you don't get one of the elite guys?
Yeah, I think so. By the way, if you have some free time, you can tell me how impressed you are that I got the Kendrick Bourne trivia question.
Impressed.
But back to Vance Thank you.
Here's
what concerns me about Vance McDonald. I remember last year we argued about Kenny Stills and this opportunity that Kenny Stills had. And when a player just isn't that good, I don't really care what the opportunity is. He's going to be disappointing. I don't know that Vance McDonald is all that good. I do see that he has an opportunity here, that there's a big void to fill. Red zone targets are obviously there. Antonio Brown was 2nd on the team in red zone targets last year. I think Vance McDonald was 3rd, but he was way behind Juju and Antonio Brown. I see no problem at all taking a late-round flyer on Vance McDonald, and you don't even have to take another tight end. You just play the waiver wire after that. But I could see him having a top 8 season. Maybe it would be kind of like an Austin Hooper top 8 season where it doesn't feel consistent or anything like that. But you take what you can get at the tight end position. You really want some touchdowns, and I certainly see the opportunity for him to fill that void.
In defense of Vance McDonald, he was a top 10 tight end last year with Antonio Brown on the team. So I do think a little bit more opportunity could make a huge difference. I get a little bit worried about the injury history. He's never played 16 games in a season. Last year was the second time ever he played 15 games. So I'm a little worried about the injuries, but I think there's a lot of upside there. But
based on the position, I mean, guys like Jordan Reed, they get hurt. There's still upside there, so it is a guy you can take a flyer on. If you miss on him, you know, the other guys that we showed with this group, Herndon, Burton, and Hockenson. Dave, I know you're a big Hockenson fan.
I am, just because of the upside. It's purely upside, and the fact that the Lions drafted him with the 1st-round pick for a reason. Part of that reason is because he's faster than most guys his size, and he's already a good route runner. And the Lions need to replace the pass catcher in the middle of the field. I know they got Danny Amendola. He can replace part of what Golden Tate did for them. I think Hawkinson's going to pick up a lot of easy targets in single coverage, and he's going to be big time in the red zone. And I love the idea of drafting him late. And his schedule's good to begin the season. He starts week 1 against the Arizona Cardinals. I think that's a favorable matchup for him. With all these guys, you're pretty much going with, okay, I hope they score a touchdown. At least that's on the odds. You have to do it with Vance McDonald. He's had 70 yards or more 4 times his entire career. TJ Hockenson, I think, has potential to get you 50 or 60 yards per week. The touchdowns will come for him. I don't have a problem drafting him late and starting with him as my streamer.
The one thing just to keep in mind, rookie tight ends, I've said this many times up on the set, they've only had one rookie tight end in the NFL finish as a #1 fantasy tight end since 2014. The reason I always pick the 2014 season is when Eric Ebron went to Detroit as a first-round pick, and clearly he failed. It took him going to Indianapolis to become a good fantasy asset. All right, so you've seen the list of 150 to 121. There are obviously going to be guys that don't make the cut. We're going to talk about that in our final segment. We want to give Adam a chance to give his top 5 guys that did not make the top 150. Adam, who do you got?
Well, first of all, I saw your list, and I decided to get 5 different guys instead of being redundant. You guys have very, very good lists. So there are really a lot of good players, even outside the top 150. But somehow Jimmy Garoppolo is not in the top 150. He's going to be the number 4 quarterback in fantasy. I don't know who the top 3 will be. I don't know who 5 will be, but he will be number 4. He is so good. In the last 5 starts of 2017, his only 5 starts in 2017, if you look at his 16-game pace, Jimmy Garoppolo is on pace for over 4,900 yards. They've obviously upgraded their wide receivers. He has one of the best tight ends in football, great offensive-minded head coach. Jimmy Garoppolo is going to be really good. Devin Singletary for the Bills, 3rd-round pick, 5th running back off the board. He's a little bowling ball, 5'7", 203 pounds. I mean, his competition is so beatable, and I think it might take a few weeks, certainly, but I do think there's a real good chance for Devin Singletary by week 4 or 5 to take over that job, and the Bills could have a sneaky good offense, maybe a top 15 offense this year. Sam Darnold, I feel like we forget that he was the number 3 pick in the draft last year. There's a ton of hype around Baker Mayfield. He's obviously much better for fantasy than Sam Darnold, but don't forget about Sam Darnold. Last 4 starts of the season, things kind of came together for him. The Jets offense got a lot better. They got Le'Veon Bell. He's a great pass catcher. They bring in Jamison Crowder, could help a little bit, but Sam Darnold, look, I think he might be a little bit under the radar right now, and let's not forget his pedigree. It's quite good. I think we have Robert Foster in the top 150. We got the wrong Bills wide receiver, Zay Jones. I feel like Heath is with me on this. Zay Jones, he was 33rd in non-PPR, 32nd in PPR last year. 56 catches, 652 and 7 on 102 targets in 16 games. Got a lot of targets toward the end of the season. Very inconsistent, but we haven't seen the best of Josh Allen, and we haven't seen the best of Zay Jones. And then I cheated a little bit. I took the Bears DST, because I just think if you hate everybody on the board, at that point in the draft, that's when you say, all right, I'm taking the Bears DST. And I imagine once we get to this point in the draft, a lot of people are going to hate basically everyone left on the board except maybe the quarterbacks. So in that case, go ahead and grab the Bears. 50 sacks, 27 interceptions last year, 6 touchdowns. Won't have that good of a year, but they are absolutely loaded. Heath, give me a little Zay Jones love.
Yeah, I don't agree with anything that you said over the last 5 minutes, especially Zay Jones. He's my, I think, number 4 ranked wide receiver on the Bills going into the season. So I don't agree with the Bears. Remember how that went with Jacksonville last year. Jimmy Garoppolo was the closest thing that Adam said to correct.
I actually enjoyed drafting with Adam because, he's just going to wait on quarterbacks and take a combo of Garoppolo and Sam Darnold. So maybe they get 16 games combined out of the 2 of them. And here's the list, 150 to 141. A lot of interesting names you can get here with some late round picks, specifically some of those quarterbacks. We go now to 140 to 131. And I think you'll find some tight ends you can wait for here. TJ Hawkinson, Vance McDonald, some interesting players. Chris Herndon also as well. And then we look at 130 to 121. Spent some time talking about a couple of rookie wide receivers on this list. And some of the running backs. Deebo Samuel, DK Metcalf at the receiver spot, Ronald Jones, Royce Freeman, and certainly Darrell Henderson. Dave says you better take him in the top 100 if you are a Todd Gurley owner. So that's the list, 121 through 150. You're going to spend all week breaking down the top 150, counting down to number 1. But some guys didn't make the list, and we'll start with you, Heath. The 5 guys that you have that didn't make the list, as Adam Azer told us in our previous segment, I also went a little bit different. There were some guys I think that we probably would all agree on consensus-wise, but I believe Dave sent his list first. You were second. I took the last of the bunch, so there are some players we might agree on. Let's show Heath's 5 guys here, and Heath, there's one guy on this list that I am very curious about, and that is Lamar Jackson. We talked about Bruce Anderson and your love for him as the potential best running back in Tampa Bay. Demarcus Robinson, we know Tyreek Hill potentially. Trubisky and Delaney Walker, guys coming off different seasons. Walker hopefully healthy, but Lamar Jackson, as we know, was very polarizing for fantasy players last year. What will he be this year?
Well, I think we listed like up to 14 or 15 quarterbacks in this session. I'm not 100% sure Lamar Jackson should be a top 12 guy, although if the indications they've sent us through the offseason are correct, then I do believe he will. They went out and went heavy in adding wide receiver talent. That tells me that the plan is not to have Lamar Jackson run it 20 times and not throw a dull. He's going to do a little bit of both. I still expect him to lead quarterbacks in rushing yards. I still expect him to come close to probably 28 combined touchdowns between passing and rushing. The question is whether he can get to 3,500 yards passing. I believe he can.
Dave, your list of the 5 guys that did not make the cut, as we see here, Damien Harris and Jalen Samuels, 2 running backs that have potential and some very explosive offenses. Noah Fant, another rookie tight end. You love the rookie tight ends this year, along with T.J. Hockenson, and then a couple rookie wide receivers, Hakeem Butler and Deontay Johnson. But Damien Harris, we spoke to Ben Volen of the Boston Globe. He is expecting a little bit of a downturn for Sony Michel, a little bit of an uptick for Harris, the guy that they drafted out of Alabama.
And the reason why is because of that short yardage role, which Bill Belichick has valued so much. LeGarrette Blount got it a long time ago, and he ran to the races with it. In college, he converted 63% of his downs 3 yards or closer, Damien Harris did. Now they're going to expect him to do that in the pros. The only catch with Damien Harris is that he's a rookie running back. Can you name a rookie running back with the Patriots other than Sony Michel, who added 1,000 yards while under Bill Belichick?
Did Lawrence Maroney do it?
Nope. He's the only one. Sony's the only one who did. So either Belichick turns over a new leaf and there's more for Damien Harris to do this year, or he ends up splitting and taking that vulture role, and that would be annoying for people that take Sony.
Could be very interesting to see how this Patriots backfield shakes out. Another backfield that I'm very curious about, and that's the one in Kansas City. Darwin Thompson, somebody that I would draft in the 120 range. Same with Andy Isabella. Matt Breida, we know, coming off of the torn pectoral injury that he suffered this offseason, but it's going to be another muddy backfield in San Francisco. Marquise Goodwin and Adam Humphries, 2 receivers I would take flyers on in their respective offenses. Darwin Thompson is somebody I will take very similar to how Heath approaches Bruce Anderson. I'm not sold on Damian Williams being the guy for 16 games. I do like Carlos Hyde at his value, but I love Darwin Thompson with the late round pick. An underrated rookie that they took in the 6th round from Utah State, and I think Darwin Thompson could end up being very fantasy viable for everyone. I am getting live text from Pete Prisco at Jets camp right now. He is at the Jets mandatory minicamp, and he says Le'Veon Bell's in great shape. He said he's also tiptoeing through the line like he normally does. So all things seem to be good to go in the fantasy football landscape. All things would be good to go with Le'Veon Bell and the Jets. Maybe not so much with Todd Gurley. We're going to get to that as we continue our top 150 countdown of the top 150 players in PPR for 2019. I'm Jamie, that's Dave, that's Heath. It's always fun when we're talking football as it's actually happening. We don't usually get to do that in June, but here we are. The teams are at, I think it's 9 teams that are mandatory minicamp for this week, so we should have a lot to cover. And the Todd Gurley news seems to be the biggest situation. Yesterday we went over 150 to, what was the number?
121.
121. I got to keep up with my math. So 150 to 121. Today we're breaking down 120 to 91. We're going to rehash a little bit of what happened yesterday when we talked Darrell Henderson because of the Todd Gurley news. Ian Rappaport of the NFL Network comes out and says, don't expect Gurley to be the bell cow back that we're used to seeing over the last couple of seasons. So let's get right into it. We see where Darrell Henderson was ranked yesterday when we look at the 150 to 121 range. Henderson comes in at 125 on the list. Keith, I know you were a little bit pessimistic about Henderson. How you feeling about Henderson now? And then talk also Malcolm Brown with what we're dealing with here with Todd Gurley.
And I think a lot of what we said yesterday about Todd Gurley goes with this report from Ian Rappaport. The difference is that we've heard Ian Rappaport say it now, which presumably means he's heard one of the Rams coaches say it now. But we were not expecting Todd Gurley to be a 20-touch-a-game guy again. I've got him now projected. I did drop him just a little bit this morning. I've got him projected now for 16.8 touches per game, about 260 over the course of the season. The problem is that's probably closer to his ceiling now than it is to his floor, which is just absolutely basement low. Henderson, I do think, needs to be bumped up a little bit. One of Henderson or Brown is going to get an opportunity on a weekly basis, I would assume now, to see approximately 10 touches per game. If Gurley goes down, that could turn into a monster workload.
So I'll ask you this, and then Dave, follow up. Where are you drafting Todd Gurley in 2019, assuming this is August as opposed to June?
2-3 turn. I'll go 2-3 turn.
And I'll go almost a full round after that, late round 3 with Todd Gurley, because look at what's happened over the last couple of months. He had 34 touches in the playoffs. These are the playoffs for the Rams. He had 1 good game, and then he had 2 duds. And he's not practicing in OTAs. He's not going to take part in a lot of the scrimmages that they have. He's not going to play in the preseason. I talked about all this yesterday. And I also said yesterday that Darrell Henderson would be a top 100 pick. Well, now he might be a top 75 pick. We're talking about him. I think round 7 would be the great time to get him now. But as we see him play in the preseason, people are going to get excited about Darrell Henderson, and they'll take him in round 6.
Part of this NFL.com report is that they are very excited about Henderson. Sean McVay coming out and saying he was the most explosive player in the draft, so they really coveted him.
Right.
To get him out of Memphis, over 2,000 total yards, 25 total touchdowns last year for Memphis. I look at Gurley. Right now, I'm in the round 3 range for him. I think round 1, round 2 is a little bit too risky to take Todd Gurley. I'm looking at maybe trying to package these two guys. Look, if you can get Gurley and Henderson, you want players in this offense because they have the chance to be special. And look, it's such an unknown with Gurley right now because if he is just being put on ice to make sure he's ready for week 1 or to get him ramped up during the season, and by the time maybe the middle of your fantasy season or the fantasy playoffs, he's back to the Todd Gurley that we know he's capable of being. You may win your league if you get him in round 3 or later. So there's a lot of still positive situations for Gurley that we just don't know. Right now it feels negative. I'm with you, Dave. Everything that's happened to the end of the season, bringing back Malcolm Brown, drafting Darrell Henderson. But those guys aren't exactly special yet. Henderson could be, but we have to see it.
There's enormous upside if you do the Gurley-Henderson pairing. There's also league-losing downside because if you use your 3rd and 7th round pick on a backfield, Gurley stays healthy and takes 15 carries a game and isn't quite as effective, and Henderson's getting 8 carries a game, you may not get a number 1 running back out of the two of them.
Or you may have the Saints from 2 years ago.
Right.
I mean,
you could. Yeah.
That's rare that we see two guys like that. Titans once upon a time with Lendell White and Chris Johnson as well. Let's move on now as we get into the player rankings, looking again at the top 150. So let's start at 120 here. The first list that we're looking at, 120 to 111. You see some of the names on this list, Jared Goff. As we look at the Rams, we're going to get into the quarterbacks a little bit as we move throughout the show. Right now, we're going to focus on some of the tight ends, and you see 3 of the guys on this list, Austin Hooper, David Njoku, Jordan Reed. They come in at 119, 117, and 115. We talked about this yesterday in terms of waiting on tight ends. We had some guys that we were able to sort of say you can sit back and wait for even a little bit further, TJ Hawkinson being one, Vance McDonald, Chris Herndon, all those guys we covered in yesterday's show. But these 3 guys, they all feel like they have a little bit more upside, specifically Njoku and Reed. I don't know if Hooper maybe reached the ceiling last year when he did get to the Pro Bowl and had a fantastic campaign for the Falcons. But you start with these 3 guys here, and I don't know how you guys feel. I'm fine waiting for one of these 3 to be my starter because you may be able to pair him with one of the guys we talked about yesterday in Hawkinson or Herndon or one of those other options. But let's get into it now with these 3 guys here. We'll start with Jordan Reed, who has a hard time staying healthy, missed 17 games over the past 3 years. Dave, where do you feel about Jordan Reed going into 2019?
I don't feel good about it at all. You remember the kid's song, Head, Shoulders, Knees, and Toes? Those are the injuries he's had over the last 5 years. That's some of them. There's more on top of that. He lost speed last year. He's easier to cover. He only had 7 red zone targets, and he played 13 games, so they're not using him as that big-time red zone threat like he used to be. His first 3 opponents in 2019, the Eagles, the Cowboys, the Bears. Those are tough matchups for Jordan Reed, all with a rookie quarterback. No guarantee he's going to stay healthy. I can't even stream him. I'm looking after round 10 to draft Jordan Reed.
Yeah, I'm the high guy on Jordan Reed, and I just look at it as there are about 20 tight ends that could be top 12 this year because the bar is so low. And you're probably going to stream tight end if you take one this late. I know that Jordan Reed, when he's right, can be a top 5 tight end. I'd just as soon have that type of production. If he gets hurt, I'll find someone else to be a streamer.
Yeah, it's almost like I feel when I get to a spot with the tight end position, I'm chasing upside, and I don't think I agree with you. I don't think there's a lot of guys in this range that have the type of upside that Jordan Reed has. Look at this offense for the Redskins. You got 2 rookie wide receivers that they brought in. Trey Quinn is somebody that they're talking up, who was a 7th-round selection last year, Mr. Irrelevant, as their slot guy after losing Jamison Crowder. We know Josh Doxson's been a horrible number 1 guy, so they're asking him to come back and do that again. I look at what Jake Gruden has said this offseason, that he's healthy, and so hopefully that's the case. Again, you're asking a guy who's never played 16 games in the NFL to stay healthy. He did play 13 games last year, but he played through that toe injury, which he seems to have corrected this offseason. So there is a very likely chance that if you draft Jordan Reed, you're taking a second tight end. But if Jordan Reed does give you that 2015 season that we saw when he was chasing Rob Gronkowski to be the number 1 tight end in fantasy and PPR, you could be a league winner here by getting him this late. Let's go now to David Njoku, who had some very good moments last year with the Browns. Hopefully we'll have some good moments again in 2019. Dave, you're the low guy. Heath, you're the high guy on Njoku. I'm right in the middle, so I'll be Goldilocks once again. So Heath, go ahead with Njoku. Why do you like him going into this year?
Again, it's a very similar argument to Reed, not necessarily the injury part. I think there's going to be a target problem for David Njoku on a consistent basis, but I do expect he's going to have multiple good starting games as a tight end, and I think he has more upside, especially if one of those wide receivers goes down due to injury. than just about anyone else in this range. Extremely talented, very good quarterback, very good offense. There just might not be quite enough targets for him.
The problem also is that we've said similar things about David Njoku in the past, and he hasn't come through. He might be one of the most overrated tight ends in fantasy football. 2 seasons, hasn't missed a game. That's great. 2 games with over 70 yards, 8 total touchdowns, 13 drops. Those are opportunities lost, and he's never had more than 75 yards in a game.
But I think this is why I'm lower on the rookie tight ends than you are. We expect he was bad as a rookie tight end. That's what we
was
expect.
Bad as a second-year tight end too.
And
now
they
added Odell Beckham into the offense. So you mentioned the target problem. So
yeah,
you
that could be a problem.
Understand it's a huge problem. He's a
tight end that had 600 yards. That's not bad.
He's a tight end. It's great when you look at the numbers at the end of the year.
Right.
But from week to week, it's like, all right, he gives me 4 points. He gives me 7 points.
He also had several big games.
Touchdown or bust.
Last year, he had 11 games with at least 5 targets. Now, that may not happen again because of Beckham, but we'll see. I mean, also, as we talked to our buddy Nathan Zagura, who covers the Browns for their website there, he said could open up some more opportunities for him because now you have to focus attention on the outside guys. Last year, they really have any outside guys that were threats.
Sure.
Antonio Callaway was not going to command double teams and additional coverage like Beckham will. But in those 11 games, at least 5 targets, he averaged 9.9 PPR points. That would have put him as the number 10 tight end. So I think you look at the range of where he could fall if his targets could stay just in that 5 range. I don't think that's a stretch to see him getting 5 targets per game. Similar to somebody like Austin Hooper, who had a very good season last year, among the top 10 tight ends, was a Pro Bowl guy. You guys are higher on him than I am. I think he's more of a guy that you settle for because I'm concerned about the targets for him with the receiving core that they do have in Atlanta. But obviously, we're looking at him somewhat in the same range, a guy that you wait for. So, Dave, I'll start with you. Austin Hooper, you think will be a top 12 guy in PPR once again?
Yeah, because of all those catches. And to me, it's specific to the league scoring system. If it's half PPR, full PPR, I think Austin Hooper is going to be in line to get a bunch of targets because Matt Ryan will check down plenty. And I think that the run game is still a question mark for Atlanta. I know that everybody's expecting Devontae Freeman to come back, and he looks good. Austin Hooper, to me, is an extension of the run game and a red zone threat for the Falcons, and he'll get decent targets. I do have problems with his consistency, just like I do with all the tight ends I'm talking about. But at the very least, he's someone that can give you a nice, decent start to the year. It's a tough matchup for him week 1 against Minnesota, but I think the targets will be there anyway.
He's fine. I'm not going to get too excited about Austin Hooper. I don't think he's bad. I think he's going to be amongst the top 8 or so in targets, and he's going to catch some passes, and he's going to average 10 yards per catch and score 3 or 4 touchdowns. He's a borderline starting tight end. It's not somebody you get excited about.
Just describe David Njoku.
Sure.
Same guy. We're talking
more
upside.
upside.
I mean, again, they're in this range for a reason. I did speak to Hooper at the Pro Bowl. He told me that one thing that helped him last year was spending time in the offseason with Matt Ryan. Hopefully that happens again, that he gets to work on that rapport, and that we see the production follow in the upcoming campaign. One receiving core that we're looking at that's very interesting because similar to Washington, there isn't exactly a standout guy, and that's the Broncos. New quarterback in Joe Flacco for now, could be Drew Lock eventually as they turn the page on what the future should be at that position. But the receiving core could lead to some interesting production for fantasy players. Cortland Sutton, not on this list that we're talking about now. He comes in on the next board, in 2 boards. He's at number 99. He's the highest ranked of this group of our consensus. Deshaun Hamilton at number 112, and Emmanuel Sanders, who's coming off that Achilles injury, at number 113. So let's start with these guys here. We'll start with Hamilton. I like Hamilton the best in PPR. I just look at what he was able to do in those final 4 games last season when Sanders was out. He had at least targets in each of the 4 games. He averaged 13.3 PPR points over that span. I think he'll end up playing in the slot. Heath, you obviously do not feel the same way. Dave, you're a little bit less hot on, a little bit more lukewarm on Hamilton, I guess. So Heath, why are you not even drafting him?
If we knew Emmanuel Sanders was out, I would feel a lot better about him. I think
he's not, just to let you know, he's not running yet full speed as of May.
And right now I'm projecting Sanders to have a small role in the offense. If he has no role, then that would make it a little bit better. Right now, I think there is a little bit of a target crunch because I think they're going to try to run the ball and play good defense. They've got a defensive head coach now, and I don't expect that
That defensive head coach last year, too, though.
Yeah, I don't expect Hamilton's going to get a ton of targets. I've got him right around 100. He's not efficient enough on a per-target basis. Catches a bunch of them, but he's going to average, it's like a Bruce Ellington, he's going to average 9 or 10 catches or yards per catch. So he could be better if Sanders is out of the picture.
He's a good slot receiver, and he's going to get decent amount of targets. You know, Joe Flacco hasn't always leaned on the slot receiver. Flacco kind of has an eye to throw downfield, which is why I like Sutton better than Deshaun. But it's really close in PPR. Non-PPR, it's not close. I'll take Cortland Sutton. And Emmanuel Sanders is third best. I think that Hamilton does have an opportunity, 5-6 catches per game, especially if Sanders doesn't play. I think that works out for him, but I wouldn't count on him for a ton of touchdowns.
There's also the addition of Noah Fant, which they didn't really have, obviously, anybody that's had in position a year ago. So Sutton's the guy you say you'll take in non-PPR, but in PPR you like Hamilton a little bit better. Sutton just was very disappointing last year. A lot of expectations for him to come in. A lot of people thought he might have been the best rookie wide receiver last year. Clearly that was not the case. Sutton in those 4 games that Sanders was out only averaged 8.3 PPR points per game. So he didn't take advantage of that opportunity, but we know no Demaryius Thomas for the entire season. He didn't also step up when Thomas was traded to Houston. Heath, your thoughts on Sutton being breakout guy of this group?
He has the most upside of this group. He's the only one that I could see actually becoming an NFL #1 wide receiver, but he was so bad last year, it's hard to imagine that happening in his sophomore campaign. This is the most difficult, for me at least, wide receiver core to project, just because of Sanders' help, because of the target distribution we're really unsure of, and then because of Sutton's talent and how it didn't show up on the field last year. But again, I'll go back to what you've talked about with quarterbacks and with tight ends. If you're drafting a number 4 or a number 5 wide receiver, I think the thing you're probably most concerned about is upside. I think Sutton has the most upside of the group.
Yeah, for sure. You know, again, I think Hamilton in PPR just because I'm not counting on Sanders. And again, he's not running as of May.
Right.
That Achilles injury suffered, I believe it was week 13 last season, so he's still got to come back from that. I'm just a little bit concerned about Emmanuel Sanders. You see here in our position rankings, not ranked for me, 51st for Dave, 50th for Heath. So Emmanuel Sanders, hopefully he's healthy. We'll see how that goes. Broncos are obviously confident by picking up his option for 2019.
I think kind of like when I left here, you know, just really being able to mature. You know, when I was here, I was young, so the first time around, and you know, leaving and kind of just really stepping up and being a pro, like taking my job serious. And you know, not to say I never took it serious before, but you know, it took time to grow and just to learn and be where I'm at now. Like, you know, I've seen a lot, been through a lot, so you know, I have a lot to give back.
Welcome back to Fantasy Football. Today we're breaking down our top 150 players for 2019. We are in the 120 to 91 range, and we're getting down to 110 to 101 here with a lot of very interesting receivers, including Deshaun Jackson. Hopefully he does become a leader for the Eagles. We're going to talk about Jackson as breakout potential as you see him on this list at 101, all the way down through Marquise Brown at 110. We're going to talk about Brown and fellow rookie N'Keal Harry coming up in a little bit with our buddy Will Brinson. But let's get into some of these receivers in this list. And we'll start with the guy at 102 because I think that's the most interesting name in this group in terms of the wide receivers, because the Steelers have a lot of targets to replace, a lot of production. No more Antonio Brown. He was traded to the Raiders this offseason. And here's what the Steelers have to replace. 104 catches, 1,297 yards, and 15 touchdowns. Wow, on 168 targets. So there is a lot of production available. But it's not just James Washington. We know that they signed Dante Moncrief. They drafted Deontay Johnson. Washington didn't exactly have a great rookie campaign in 2018. Only 1 touchdown, no games with double digits in PPR points. They have a guy named Juju Smith-Schuster. They have James Conner. We talked about Vance McDonald, but who is going to step up and replace Antonio Brown? Dave, who do you like?
Who do I like? I guess it's Washington, but it's kind of by default. And really, I'm not going to be confident about any of these guys until we see what unfolds in training camp in the preseason. Washington does have big playability. We saw that at Oklahoma State, and we saw it a couple of times last season. He did finish with, whatever this is worth, 2 games of his last 3 with at least 60 yards, but he had a 42.1% catch rate. That's ugly. And I know that Deontay Johnson is a real interesting rookie prospect. He's a guy that didn't make our consensus top 150, but he's in my top 150. I'll take Washington for now, but don't be surprised if it's Deontay Johnson by the time we get to August.
Yeah, I'm hedging a little bit on the projections. I've still got Washington, I think, the highest at 46 wide receiver. There's a lot of upside there. I do think Dante Moncrief could also factor into this, especially in the red zone. I just really, my fear is that this is kind of a rotating thing where one guy's second one week, one guy's second the next week, and then none of them are really fantasy viable. Hopefully one of these 3, Washington, Moncrief, or Johnson, takes the reins in training camp.
But you're the Steelers guy in terms of their passing volume. So, I mean, could it be where not necessarily you're talking about, let's just say Juju becomes Antonio.
Right.
And now all these guys become Juju.
Right.
Can one of them, or maybe all 3 of them, as a group, become number 3 receivers.
I think they can replace. Yes, I think they're not going to be as efficient as Juju was last year.
No, but what I'm saying is,
I think they can replace. Yes,
in a 3-receiver league, can you feel comfortable saying, I'm going to start Moncrief on one team, I'm going to start Washington on another team, and Deontay Johnson?
I think 2 of them.
2 of them.
I think 2. Like if 2 of them are playing a majority of the snaps, then I absolutely think so. Because I don't think the targets will be as concentrated as they were when it was Antonio Brown and Juju. They're going to spread that out a little bit.
And again, the Steelers led the NFL in passing attempts last year, so there is a lot of opportunity for these guys. I will take James Washington first. You see, we all have them in the same range in the late 40s in our positional rankings, so it'll be interesting to see if Washington, in fact, takes advantage of this opportunity. He wants to play a little bit lighter than he was last year, but we've seen the Steelers. They've taken young guys before. Antonio Brown and Emmanuel Sanders were both young receivers that were fighting for a role on this team. Brown took the lead over Sanders. Sanders eventually got the opportunity, and both guys ended up having nice seasons for several years with the Steelers, and then, as we see with Brown and Sanders last few years ago, moving on to the Broncos. So we'll see if James Washington takes advantage of that. All right, so we're all going to take a chance to pick one of our favorite breakout receivers from this group. I'm going to start with you, Heath, because now Antonio Brown's teammate, Tyrell Williams, comes in at number 103. He's your favorite of this 5 wide receivers here to have a breakout season in 2019. Tell me why.
And we've seen him get over 100 targets one time in his career. He went over 1,000 yards in that season.
2016.
Yeah, 2016. And that was when Keenan Allen was out. And he does have to deal with Antonio Brown. But there are 361 targets available on this Oakland Raiders team. They essentially got rid of their entire receiving corps. Jared Cook is gone. 361 is plenty for Antonio Brown to take 150, 160 targets, and Tyrell to still get in that 110 to 120 range. And if he does, I think he's a high-end wide receiver 3. I've got him as a top 30 guy right now.
I see where you're coming from with Tyrell Williams. I like Deshaun Jackson a little bit more. And I know it sounds a little silly because the last couple of years, Deshaun Jackson just has not been good for fantasy football, but he's going to Philadelphia. They need that deep ball component. He's going to be able to deliver that. Pro Football Focus had Deshaun Jackson with 27 deep targets. Opportunities. But only 10 of them were catchable. He caught 9 of the 10. 3 of the touchdowns, 374 yards, were from Ryan Fitzpatrick. I think Carson Wentz is better than Fitzpatrick, better than Carson Wentz. He's going to obviously be a better deep ball passer. He's been rated as a top 15 deep ball passer on PFF. I think Deshaun Jackson is one of the most perfect bench receivers that a fantasy owner can draft. You can get him right around pick 100, which is right what we're talking about. You start with him on the bench. You use him as a bye-week replacement during the season. Huge boom-bust potential. And you could actually say the same thing for all the receivers that we're talking about, from Tyrell Williams to Deshaun Jackson to who you have too, Jamie.
Well, I want to ask you about Deshaun because I think it's interesting because they did add Jay Jaw, rookie Arcega-Whiteside. Mm-hmm. You look at the targets last year, there's not really anybody to replace. Golden Tate only had 44 targets after he was added. So I think you're hoping for Deshaun Jackson clearly to get more targets.
I think he's going to get close to 100 targets.
But,
I don't think it's going to be.
So who loses then? Does Zach Ertz lose from the 156 targets he had? Does Aguilar come down significantly from the 97?
There's one.
Does Jeffrey lose a lot from the 92? Because where are the targets coming from to get Deshaun Jackson to that 100?
I think it's going to be a lot of Nelson Aguilar, and I think it's going to be some of the running backs as well. I think some of those targets are going to shrink.
I will say, just looking at the way they targeted players last year, they were the only team in the NFL that threw less than half of their passes to wide receivers, because they threw the ball so much to Zach Ertz, to Dallas Goedert, and to the running backs. They may change the way they play, but there are not very many wide receiver targets available in Philadelphia.
That's my only concern with Deshaun Jackson, is will he get enough targets to be fantasy relevant? And he's had a hard, last couple of years for him, 12.5 PPR points in 2019 was his average, didn't play 16 games. Same thing 2017, only 9.8 PPR points per game. So he's run the gamut in terms of, being a useful fantasy option.
No, he doesn't have top 24 upside. He is strictly a bench receiver.
Yeah, and he's going to be a guy probably better in daily and best ball than he is in seasonal, just because of what the big play potential is. Sure. You never know exactly when you're going to want to start him. Curtis Samuel is somebody I'm looking at. I just like what he did at the end of last season. You know what this receiving core is. It's really nothing of significance. DJ Moore is somebody I think that we all have a lot of hope for, but Samuel should be that number 2 guy. I'm not worried about Chris Hogan coming in and taking on a lot of production. Obviously, Christian McCaffrey and Greg Olsen will get their share of production. But Samuel, at least 11 PPR points in 6 of his final 7 games last season, finally started to come on as a useful wide receiver, and in 3 of those games had at least 8 targets. So I hope Cam Newton's fine. We're going to find out about Cam Newton in a little bit when we bring on our buddy Will Brinson. But I look at Curtis Samuel's upside, and I'm excited about it in this offense, in this scenario of what Norv Turner brought to this passing attack last year with the Panthers. Again, if Cam Newton's right, I think there's a lot to like about what Curtis Samuel brings to the table in 2019. That's a look at the wide receivers. One running back we're going to talk about in this group. It's a running back scenario we're going to talk about a lot over the course of the week, and that's the Chiefs, and Carlos Hyde comes in on this list here. I like Carlos Hyde's situation at the value you can get him. Hyde at 106 on this list. The one thing about Carlos Hyde is a lot of people are going to look at him and say he's probably done, past his prime, old. Well, he's not actually that old. He's not 30 yet, and we know last year he bounced around, started in Cleveland, ended up in Jacksonville, and then didn't do much when he got to the Jaguars. The Chiefs have already said, which they should, that Damian Williams will start, and he deserves it after what he did to close last season. But will Damian Williams finish the season as a starter? That's my concern. Do you guys share those same concerns and maybe buying into Carlos Hyde as somebody you can get in the top 100 range?
About a year ago this time, I was buying into Carlos Hyde in Cleveland. I even talked to him after a preseason game. He seemed motivated to be back in Ohio. As the lead back, he reminded me that he's never been benched over his entire career. And they liked him so much they traded him. He actually averaged 3.5 yards per carry with the Browns. I'm wondering if he's on the downside, but
He averaged 15.3 PPR points per game in his first four with the Browns,
he
too.
scored a lot of touchdowns. He had a touchdown in 5 or 6 games. That's where I was going with this, is that if he's in Kansas City and he's the only back in Kansas City, then you know that the numbers are going to be there for him, because that's what Andy Reid running backs do. I don't mind going to get him right around that same range, maybe even a little bit before 100th overall. This is a good time to go and get him because he's got that potential. You just have to wait for it with Carlos Hyde, and you have to make sure that if Damian Williams goes down, that Darwin Thompson doesn't come along the corner and take more work away from Carlos Hyde than we're hoping for.
Yeah, I am not very optimistic about Carlos Hyde's skill level. I'm also not sure it matters. If Damian Williams gets hurt and Carlos Hyde gets that starting job, he's going to be a top 20 running back, and he might be even better. He's a good lottery ticket. I don't know how long you'll hold on to him. If you're 4 weeks into the season and Williams is dominating the touches, he might be one of those guys you have to cut loose of.
Well, we also don't know if Damian Williams is going to get the full workload. Last year when he took over for Kareem Hunt, he really was the only guy there because Spencer Ware was battling injuries, and so they had to lean on Damian Williams, and he took full advantage of it. But they bring in Carlos Hyde for a reason. They draft Darwin Thompson. This is kind of why I'm a little skeptical on Damian Williams with a top 36 pick. I think 48, 50, you want to take the chance on Williams in that spot, it's perfectly acceptable. But if you take him in the first 3 rounds, I'm a little bit concerned because we could see Hyde taking 4 to 10 touches per game.
Right.
We could see Thompson taking 2 to 5 touches per game. That's going to hurt Damian Williams, as we saw last year, because he may not have the full workload that made him so successful. So I am going to take a flyer on Carlos Hyde. I've been in several drafts where I've gotten Hyde and Darwin Thompson, and I'm thrilled with that because if, in fact, Williams, who only has 50 carries in the regular season as a career high, 110 total touches last year as a career high, if he can't handle being the full-time guy, you want a piece of this Chiefs backfield, and it can be a lot of fun for your fantasy roster. We're breaking down the top 150 countdown here. We're at... where are we right now? 100 to 91. We're getting to that point. We're in 110 to 101. We're kind of crossing over ranges here, and one guy that is certainly has the opportunity to be popular for fantasy owners, N'Keal Harry. Gotta be fun to catch passes from Tom Brady.
Think they played soccer after? You saw the soccer goals?
They may have. They may have. I'm sure. I'm sure N'Keal Harry probably has some soccer skills. I'm sure Tom Brady can probably do whatever he wants.
He can play goalie.
He can play goalie.
Doesn't have to run.
They can get Gronk for goalie.
I don't know if you want to take a chance with Tom Brady's hands, though, playing goalie. That could be a little problematic. One guy who I know will save everything for you, and that's the host of the Pick 6 podcast, Will Brinson. Welcome in, Will. How are you today?
What's up, guys? I'm doing well. Thanks for having me on this lovely, what is it, Tuesday?
Tuesday.
I lost track.
Yeah, you get confused when you record your show usually the day before. So I appreciate you having me on to break down the top 150 on your podcast. Hopefully everyone enjoyed that. We are certainly excited to have you here to talk about some of the rookie wide receivers. We're looking at a couple guys here that have opportunities in some different offenses. N'Keal Harry being one for the Patriots, losing some production. We don't know about Josh Gordon and if he's going to be able to play this year, but Rob Gronkowski's gone, no Cordell Patterson, no Chris Hogan. There's a chance for N'Keal Harry to step up and be a prominent target for Brady. And then also Marquise Brown, who has the chance to potentially be the number 1 receiver for the Ravens. So, Will, I'll start with you. Let's start with N'Keal Harry. You look at this Patriots offense, they haven't exactly leaned on rookie receivers very much over the Bill Belichick and Tom Brady era. But what do you think about Harry's opportunity in 2019?
Well, I mean, the depth chart is great, right? There's just not a whole lot there. And when you go, I think my biggest concern when I think about Harry, at least from a fantasy standpoint, his production, is that when you look at what the Patriots did last year, they only had 357 targets to non-running backs. That is not very many. James White led them with 123. 108 went to Julian Edelman. You have to expect that target share to be pretty similar. 72 to Gronk and 68 to Josh Gordon. So what's going to happen with those? I mean, we know Gronk's not coming back, but what's going to happen with Gordon? Is he going to be in play at all? And if he's not, then I think Harry can be a guy who can actually be pretty productive, certainly capable of taking the ball a long way. He's actually a pretty good route runner, can juke guys in the open field. I think he can be a very viable red zone threat for them. They're going to need to improve that with Gronk gone now. I just don't know if you can count on the Patriots to be a high-octane offense that can generate a ton of fantasy points on a week-to-week basis for the passing game. Brady averages 34 passing attempts in the final 8 games of last year, so that would be only 544 total targets for the season. In my mind, what they've done with this offseason is they said, we're going to play the slow burn game. We're going to run the ball effectively. That's why they got Damian Harris. They have Sony Michel. The offensive line is very good. They got some blocking tight ends. And I think they're going to want to just pound the ball, play defense, win games in non-blowout fashion, and just try to get to the playoffs with a bye. So I don't love N'Keal Harry's upside. I think he's a very good player. I just don't know how productive he'll be from a fantasy standpoint.
He feels like somebody that you want more so in Dynasty than you do in seasonal leagues. And that's interesting because we don't know how long Tom Brady's going to play. Edelman's targets, I think, should increase. You know, he had the 4-game suspension last year as well. They also have Demaryius Thomas. We don't know how he's going to be, you know, coming off of that Achilles injury. Look, he's somebody that's still on the team for now.
Right, for now.
Philip Dorsett is another player that they bring back after he was a free agent this offseason. Your interest level in N'Keal Harry, Heath, you have him ranked the highest.
Yeah, I've got him ranked the highest. I don't have a rookie wide receiver ranked in the top 40, so there's none of them that I'm super excited about. I do think there's a little bit of upside just because there are targets available for the New England Patriots. And even if he just gets maybe 90 to 100, he could have some success, as Will mentioned, in the red zone. The other upside for him is Julian Edelman, his age and his injury history. If he goes down, Harry could all of a sudden be the #1 wide receiver on this team.
I think he's more than your typical rookie wide receiver. I think he can line up everywhere. You mentioned the route running. I think that's something that he can do well. He's just not a burner, and we know that this Patriots offense just does not cater to outside wide receivers very often, so that makes me nervous about N'Keal Harry as even a quality bench receiver. If you want to take a flyer on him late on draft day, round 11 plus, do it. But I don't think he's going to return good numbers, not in this iteration of the Patriots.
At Arizona State last year, 73 catches, 1,008 yards, and 9 touchdowns. Marquise Brown had a lot more success at Oklahoma. 132 catches, 2,413 yards, 17 touchdowns in the past 2 years, playing with some pretty good quarterbacks in Baker Mayfield and Kyler Murray. Well, you look at the offense in Baltimore, and there is really not a lot in this receiving core. Willie Snead is the top returning receiver coming back. They like Chris Moore. They've talked about him a lot. They also drafted Miles Boykin. But Marquise Brown, they spent their first-round pick on. We know he's still dealing with that foot injury, and this is an offense that wants to run the ball with an unproven quarterback in Lamar Jackson from a throwing standpoint. Can you get excited about Marquise Brown this year?
Well, the good news for him, like N'Keal Harry, is the depth chart. We like to play a game on the podcast where I come up with fake or real names, and we guess whether or not they're Ravens wide receivers. I mean, good luck if you play this game. They have Joe Horn on there. They really do. Joe Horn, not the same guy.
Right.
I think, again, you come down to the offense, right? You look at Lamar Jackson last year, 22.6 pass attempts per game after he was inserted as the starter for Joe Flacco. It was a run-heavy offense. I don't think that they can sustain that over the full course of a season. The good news is they brought in Greg Roman as a new offensive coordinator. He has a lot of success with running quarterbacks. The bad news from a fantasy standpoint is you look at what Tyrod Taylor and Colin Kaepernick did, and they never topped 30 pass attempts per game. It's just not going to be there, right? I would be stunned if Lamar Jackson did that, given how much they've invested in the running game, given how inaccurate he is just in terms of really short and intermediate throws. I do think there's some upside here for Marquise Brown, though, because he's a guy you could throw to in the screen game short at the line of scrimmage to improve that completion percentage, and he's a burner. I mean, he can get downfield, and Lamar Jackson, for all of his faults, has one of the best deep balls in the game, can throw it as far as just about anybody. And so I don't mind the upside that Marquise Brown gives you. I do think, though, that because of sort of his stature as the first wide receiver taken in the draft and his production in college, he might be a bit expensive for a flyer I want to take on draft.
Will just mentioned that he was a burner. I think he's uncoverable because of that speed, but he's also diminutive, and he's coming back from the injury. We've talked about that, and Lamar Jackson can get the ball down the field, but he's not necessarily accurate with it. I look at Marquise Brown the same way that I looked at Deshaun Jackson. I talked to you about Deshaun Jackson being a good bench receiver. I think Brown is the exact same type of player where you draft him in round 9, round 10. This is in PPR, and you just put him on your bench, and when you need a wide receiver, he's that boomer bust type. He might connect for an 80-yard touchdown, or he might get you 2 catches for 20 yards, and that's it. Not somebody that I think can ascend to being a top 20 type of fantasy receiver.
Yeah, I mean, I think it is possible. It's going to be really interesting with the Ravens' offensive tech. Will talked about how little they threw it last year. And I do think it's hard to believe they spent a first and a third-round pick on a wide receiver and they're not going to throw it at all. So I think the pass attempts will go up. It's just whether Jackson, and I think he can improve in his accuracy, and whether Brown gets to do enough this offseason to be ready to contribute.
Right.
One. I think that's a bigger problem. The second half of the season, he might be a waiver wire pickup that's actually a top 40 wide receiver. It's going to be tough early on.
And I know Marquise Brown obviously projects to be better than what John Brown was, but Brown's numbers just went in the tank after Joe Flacco left the starting roster and Jackson replaced him. They just could not connect those two guys. It was the tight ends. It was the short area targets of Willie Snead and the running backs. That's where Lamar Jackson, on the few attempts that he did make, that's where he was looking most of the time. All right, Will, we know you're a big Carolina guy. NC State is your wheelhouse. And Cam Newton, I'm sure, one of the quarterbacks you look at quite a bit. He comes on this list here, 100 to 91. We're going to focus on the quarterbacks with you. Cam last year missed the final 2 games of the regular season with a shoulder injury. Just started throwing the football, according to Ron Rivera, so hopefully he's on track to be ready for training camp and certainly ready by the time we get to week 1. But you see the quarterbacks on this list: Matt Ryan at 92, Cam at 94, Carson Wentz at 100. We're also going to factor in a couple of other guys that we have shown you at least, guys like Drew Brees at 108. Jared Goff at 118, Jameis Winston as well at 107. But I want to focus on Cam here. So, Will, you look at Cam Newton when you get to your draft, and you've done a lot of drafts with us. Is he somebody you say, I have to have him on my fantasy roster, or is he somebody you say, let somebody else deal with this headache?
No, I mean, he is somebody that I'd be willing to draft at the right price. And I think this is, look, we all fall in the same strategical boat, right? These are going to be the guys that we end up drafting. I think that Carson Wentz, I think the ADP for Carson Wentz right now is like 84 and Cam is 100. At that price, I would probably lean towards Cam because of the upside and because you can pair him with somebody later on like a Breeze or a Jameis Winston, Phillip Rivers, and Roethlisberger. You get all these guys late, right? And you're going to see some of the hyped up young guys like Baker Mayfield. I know you guys talked about on the show about Kyler Murray. I think there's going to be a ton of value at the quarterback position. I will point out, Jordan Rodriguez was on my podcast today, actually, and you can go check it out on iTunes. Really good conversation with her. And she'd reported that Cam is actually throwing the ball overhand and throwing with a regular-sized football, which sounds kind of stupid, but it is only early June, right? I mean, if he's doing that, it means that he's ahead of schedule. And it doesn't seem like the surgery that Cam had was the same invasive surgery he had a few years ago. Instead, this was a clean out, a scope. And to me, that means there's a chance that Cam's going to be perfectly ready to go by week 1. They're going to get the Buccaneers twice in the first 6 weeks of the season. Gerald McCoy, a little revenge game. That's why he signed there. And I think that Cam's a pretty good discount right now, especially if you're doing the best ball draft, doing best ball drafts where people might be scared of him because they don't know if he's going to play or not. I just think Cam routinely falls outside of where he should go. And if you look at what Norv Turner did in that offense, he made it so much easier for Cam's completion percentage to skyrocket last year. You see it at 67.9. He told us he was going to get him above 60. Nobody believed him. He got him above 67. I think the interceptions you'd like to see come down. The rushing yards aren't necessarily there, but they're enough to complement it and boost his total fantasy points over each game on an average basis. So to me, Cam Newton still presents really good value right now. Still need to see how healthy he is come training camp.
Right, and there are enough quarterbacks. We talked about this a lot. Like you said, well, we all fall in the same strategic way with quarterbacks. If you miss on Cam, there are plenty of guys you can get to replace Cam, and it's not a bad idea if you do draft Cam Newton. Our buddy Adam Mazer has done this a couple drafts. He's drafted Cam Newton and Jimmy Garoppolo, who's somebody he likes. That's a perfect fallback option if Jimmy G, if in fact is healthy himself. Let's look at these other quarterbacks here. I'm going to sort of combine them a little bit, and just so we can make sure we hit on all these guys, because I do think that they're all relevant here. So you see the list here: Matt Ryan, Carson Wentz, Jameis Winston, Drew Brees, and Jared Goff. They rank 92 to 118. I'm going to pair a couple of these guys together. So Ryan, Brees, and Goff were all top 10 quarterbacks last season. Ryan was number 2, Brees number 8, Goff number 6. Ryan seems to be the safest of this group. I don't know if you agree with that, Keith. Who of these 3 guys do you like the best? Matt Ryan, Drew Brees, Jared Goff.
I do like Ryan the best. I don't think any of these 3 are going to repeat what they did last year necessarily in terms of where they rank in 2019. But I do think Ryan's the safest, just because while his volume could go down a little if the entire Falcons defense doesn't get hurt this year, there's no question he's going to throw the ball more than Drew Brees, who has just seen the volume go down, down, down. I think Brees is really a great bust candidate, as someone that's still being drafted as a top 8 quarterback.
Yeah, it could be frustrating, although getting Jared Cook may help his value. A lot
it's just hard to imagine he's any more efficient than he was last year. He was even efficient for him.
Absolutely, and as you know, Tom Brady and Drew Brees are sort of defying logic that at 40+ years old that they're still being very good. Will, I want to ask you about a couple guys that are coming off of some interesting years from a year ago. Winston, we know couldn't sustain being the starter, dealing with the suspension and then losing his job at times to Ryan Fitzpatrick. Does get Bruce Arians, and then Carson Wentz had the back injury following the year where he had the ACL injury. Of those two guys, you talked about Wentz's ADP. Which of those two guys do you maybe look at and say, I could win my fantasy league with one of these quarterbacks?
Oh, it's Winston, no question. I mean, look, Wentz is awesome, and he could really help you a lot in terms of winning a league and putting up big numbers. I know he's getting some MVP buzz out there in the general discussion of Twitter and NFL media, and I think I looked at the odds. He's like 14-1. He's one of the top 5 guys in terms of MVP. That's a bit high for me. I think when you look at Winston, he's the last guy on that list of quarterbacks that you guys had ranked on that sheet in terms of ADP right now. Nobody is investing heavily in Jameis Winston, but when you talk about quarterbacks who have breakout years in the past 5 or 6 seasons, a lot of times it's been because they got paired up with the right coach. And if you were ever going to find a coach that was matched up perfectly with Jameis Winston, it's Bruce Arians. Now, I don't know how much fire and gas Bruce has got coming back, after being retired for a year and working in the booth and how cooked up he'll be. But, this is a guy in Jameis who is the ultimate no-risk-it, no-biscuit quarterback. He is blind to defenders and willing to chuck it into coverage. Arians loves it. He'll come back from mistakes. And I could see him, if that defense falters again for Tampa Bay, and I think it certainly could. They don't have much of a pass rush. The secondary is not that great. You could see Winston putting up some pretty big numbers with the weapons he has in Mike Evans, Chris Godwin, and O.J. Howard. I think he's a potential league winner I would take him as a second quarterback, but I think he's a guy that could take you over the top.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. As you see, I have him ranked in my top 10. Dave just outside. Keith has him as his number 11 quarterback, so it should be a fun year for Winston. Also, as Wentz gets the weapons that we talked about, Deshaun Jackson, Jay Jaw, hopefully some productive years from those guys. On CBS Sports HQ, looking at picks 100 to 91, we talked about some of the quarterbacks recently with Cam Newton, Carson Wentz, Matt Ryan. Right now, we're going to get into some of these running back situations here. And one guy in particular, at number 95, is Jordan Howard. Miles Sanders not on this list. We'll talk about him in the next couple of days, the rookie that they drafted out of Penn State. But Jordan Howard, they acquired him from the Bears this offseason. It appeared at the time when they got Howard, okay, maybe he's going to be their guy, going to replace Jay Ajayi, going to be the bell cow. And then we know in the NFL draft they spend the early capital to get Miles Sanders. So Howard comes in. All the reports so far have been glowing. He's once again, we heard this last offseason in Chicago, doing a great job catching the ball. They don't have Darren Sproles anymore. They still have a plethora of guys, though, to compete with Howard, I think, in what I hope will be the backup role. But Josh Adams still on the roster, Corey Clement, Wendell Smallwood, Doug Peterson talking about Boston Scott. So a lot of mouths to feed in this Philadelphia backfield. Dave, I'll start with you. Your thoughts on Jordan Howard for this year?
I think he might be among the best zero RB targets that you could ask for, because he should begin the season as the lead running back in Philadelphia. And he really wasn't a bad running back in Chicago. He had 9 touchdowns. He actually was good in short yardage, 65.3% conversion rate when given short yardage opportunities. That's a role he might be able to hang on to in Philadelphia. I don't hate him. I would take him in round 6 or 7.
The problem I have, and it's with any running back in Philadelphia, is the lead back in Philadelphia doesn't mean the same thing as it means everywhere else. We haven't seen a running back with Doug Peterson get 220 touches in this offense. And so, especially in the PPR format, I'd like to have somebody that's going to have some involvement in the passing game as well. I anticipate right now that's going to be Miles Sanders. If Sanders isn't ready, I still don't think it's Jordan Howard. I think it's likely going to be one of those other guys Jamie referenced. So I could see Howard eking out 200 touches, but he was good for fantasy in Chicago because he was getting 275, 280 touches. I don't think that's really possible in Philadelphia.
Yeah, and Sanders, again, dealing with that hamstring injury. I think one thing, though, that you referenced, they haven't really had a guy. They've been trying. They make
I'm
the
not sure
trade.
they got a guy now.
Well, that's true.
Yeah.
And they may just have 2 guys that they like.
Right.
Sanders and Howard could just be 2 guys that they want to use, and then finding that pass-catching guy, quote-unquote pass-catching guy, if Sanders doesn't do it. But it's an interesting backfield to keep an eye on, and hopefully Sanders is 100% with that hamstring problem. The 49ers have a lot of guys as well. They bring in Tevin Coleman as a free agent. They're getting Jerick McKinnon back from the ACL injury. Matt Breida also there. He's dealing with a pectoral injury, and Raheem Mostert also dealing with a forearm injury that he suffered last year. We're going to talk about Tevin Coleman on tomorrow's show, so I really want to focus more on McKinnon, who's in this range, and the backup guys. McKinnon comes in at number 97. So McKinnon and Breida really, I think, are a lot of fantasy players are looking at those two guys and saying, I'm going to pass on Tevin Coleman. I'm going to see if McKinnon still has anything left after last year's ACL. I'm going to maybe take a flyer on Breida, who was their best running back last year by default because he was healthy. So let's start with McKinnon. Heath, you have McKinnon ranked the highest at 36. You clearly expect him to bounce back to some level of maybe what he was in Minnesota before he went to San Francisco last year.
I think he could be similar to what he was possibly the year before we saw him in Minnesota. I've got him for about 140 carries, about 40 catches. I do think this is obviously a very good offense for running backs, and they have talked about how they want to use everyone. I don't think there's just an opportunity for someone to get 20 touches a game, which means there's an opportunity probably for two guys to get 10 to 15 touches a game. And McKinnon can be good in that role as long as you're not trying to force him into the feature role.
I'm not convinced he's going to make the final roster, Jamie. I'm worried about Jerick McKinnon coming back healthy and strong, and even if he does both of those things, what's his role going to be? They just added Tevin Coleman for a reason. They gave him a decent amount of money, and Matt Breida is still on the roster. They can mix and match, but how big of a role could Jerick McKinnon actually have? Might just be a third down back, and I don't think that's going to equate to any more than maybe 3-4 catches per game. Maybe occasionally 5 or 6. I'm not excited about him.
Kyle Shanahan did seem to indicate they're going to keep all three guys, and again, hopefully McKinnon's right. It's a little bit of a surprise that he's not practicing at OTAs. We'll see when they get to their mandatory minicamp if McKinnon is ready to ramp up his activity. The guy who's replacing Tevin Coleman in Atlanta is in this range, and that is Ito Smith. He checks in at number 96 in our top 150 for PPR. So we spoke to Matt Tabik, who works for the Falcons team website. He's a former colleague of ours here at CBS Sports. Matt told us on our Fantasy Football Today podcast that Ito Smith could have a prominent role. Dave, you kind of alluded to this, that everybody's excited about Devontae Freeman coming back from last year's injury, but Freeman only played in 2 games because of that groin problem. Freeman should be the guy. Smith should be the second guy. We'll see if that's the case. Your excitement level for Ito Smith?
It's modeled. It's mild. Excuse me.
Modeled?
Modeled. It's modeled as mild. I'm not a huge believer in Devontae Freeman coming back strong, but I want to see Ito Smith play better, and that we should see in the preseason. And if we do, then I'll be more excited about Ito Smith. I think he's in that round 8-9 range. Somebody that you get as a bet against Freeman.
It can be very dangerous to use yards per carry, yards per reception when judging a running back. But when you can judge Ito directly against what Tevin Coleman did and see that he was averaging like a yard less per carry and 2 yards less per reception, that's a little bit scary. He just wasn't very good when he touched the ball other than scoring touchdowns last year. I do think there's upside there. If he's going to become cheap in drafts, I'm fine with it. It's not somebody I'm going to reach for.
The thing about Freeman is the last 2 years he's dealt with injuries. He had the knee problem, concussion 2 years ago, a groin injury last year, and again, 2 games. I love what they've done with this offensive line. Yeah. This is why I'm so excited about Ito Smith in this range, because if Freeman does fail to come back from the injury and play at the level that we saw before this started to happen to him, and Smith gets the Coleman touches,
right,
you're going to have a potential league winner in this spot if this offensive line does what it's capable of doing. They have a brutal schedule. They also added a rookie in Quadre Allison, so we'll see how he operates and maybe as a bigger back take some touches away from both Smith and Freeman, so he could be a guy that you also look at with a late round pick. But I'm fine taking a chance on Ito Smith in this range. Breaking down our top 150, we're at list number 90 to 61. That's probably the spot we're in. It's Wednesday. We're talking about these 30 players. We're doing a mock draft today, a super flex mock draft. I'm excited. I know you guys are as well. Heath actually made me wait a day just so he could be a part of it. We got our podcast today, which we've been doing all week long, breaking down our top 150. Our stories are on the site on CBS Sports, breaking down the top 150. It is awesome. This week so far has been great. We got 3 more days to go starting now, and we're going to get right to it. I'm Jamie. That's Dave. That's Heath. You know us. Hopefully we are helping you win your leagues in 2019. Let's get right to it. Looking at the list here, starting 90 to 81. Eventually I'm going to get down what numbers we're at and get that a little bit more perfected. But you see the guys here, a lot of wide receivers on this list, which we're going to talk about. Corey Davis, Mecole Hardman, Paris Campbell, Golden Tate, and Sterling Shepard. Some of these guys have the chance to be some breakout candidates. And some of these guys, especially some of these young receivers, could be very interesting for fantasy this year, as well as some of these veteran guys. Let's start with the Giants. Our buddy Pete Prisco is actually in New York right now. I guess he's in New Jersey at Giants camp, so I will have some reports from him throughout the day on CBS Sports HQ. But we know that Odell Beckham is gone. Big void to fill. Beckham last year, 124 targets, 77 catches, 1,052 yards and 6 touchdowns in 12 games. No longer part of the Giants. They add Golden Tate, Sterling Shepard, coming back for another season, hopefully can take over that lead role. We'll start with Shepard here. Heath, I'll ask you your thoughts on Shepard. Can he be the Odell Beckham replacement?
I do not think there is an Odell Beckham replacement in terms of that total number of targets. I think the interesting thing for Shepard is, does he make a leap? Because just being honest, he has to make a leap to become a better wide receiver than Golden Tate. It's easier to say, yeah, Shepard's been there. Tate's the new guy. We'll give Shepard the higher share of the targets. But over the point of their career so far, Golden Tate's been a better wide receiver. So it's a big challenge for him just to get past Tate, because if you don't do that, you're probably irrelevant in fantasy. Saquon Barkley is likely to lead this team in targets. Evan Ingram's going to take a big share. I think so.
Oh, wow.
Evan Ingram's going to take a big share, probably over 100 at tight end. There's just not enough unless you're the number one receiver.
I feel like the money is best placed on Shepard versus Tate in this offense. I'd rather have Ingram ahead of both of these guys, by the way. If I had to pick one on my fantasy team, just the position scarcity helps Evan Ingram, and the fact that he might be the target leader for the Giants, certainly among these
I think
three
anybody
guys.
ranking the Giants is going Barkley 1, Ingram 2, and then it's a toss-up between 3 and 4.
And I'll tell you why I like Shepard better than Tate. Last year, he had kind of a mini audition playing outside. I remember Odell didn't play the last 4 games of the season. 2/3 of his snaps were out wide. He averaged 19.4 yards per catch. He did a lot of crossing routes from out there, just as he does when he lines up in the slot. He also took on some deep balls. He did well with them, and his PPR average was basically the same with or without Odell Beckham. It was a little bit lower without OBJ, 10.3 versus 10.9. He is a great bench receiver to go and get in PPR.
Shepard's played 11 games over the past 2 seasons without Beckham. Remember, Shepard missed some time last year as well. But in those 11 games, he's averaging 12.6 PPR points per game, so his numbers tend to pop a little bit when Beckham is out. That would be the hope. The one concern would be is who's the quarterback for 16 games? Is it going to be Eli Manning for the full season, as Dave Gettleman, the general manager, has alluded to? Manning playing for another 3 seasons?
Right.
Or is it Daniel Jones, who they spent a first-round pick on? And does he take over at some point if the Giants, as I think a lot of people are expecting, struggle? So we could see quarterback change impact how this passing attack operates. Let's get to a couple of rookie wide receivers here, one of them being Mecole Hardman for the Chiefs. There's some uncertainty with the Chiefs wide receiver core because we know Tyreek Hill could be facing a suspension. That has yet to be determined. We'll see how that all unfolds and how this Chiefs wide receiver core will look. We all have, I think, Sammy Watkins ranked as the #1 wide receiver for the Chiefs as of now. If you look at our rankings on CBS Sports, and I should say this for our top 150 breakdown, we have removed Tyreek Hill from our rankings. Again, the assumption would be is that he's going to face a lengthy suspension. If he does not get suspended for the entire season, we will put him back in our rankings, and you'll see where Tyreek Hill stacks up, which will obviously impact Hardman and eventually impact Sammy Watkins, who we'll talk about later on this week. But the Chiefs drafted Hardman to potentially be, I don't know, the Tyreek Hill replacement, if that's possible. You don't want to put that type of expectation on him on a football field. Tyreek Hill last year, 137 targets, 87 catches, 1,479 yards, and 12 touchdowns, was among the better wide receivers in the NFL. And Watkins, again, should be the #1 guy if, in fact, Hill is gone. But Dave, Hardman is somebody that profiles similar to Tyreek Hill on the field, just a small receiver that can do a variety of things, catch the ball in the backfield, take some handoffs. We saw him play well at Georgia last year. What are your expectations for him?
Well, let's start with the obvious. Can he replace Tyreek Hill statistically? No chance. That's not going to happen. But could he finish? Could he finish as a top 30 wide receiver like Tyreek Hill did as a rookie? I think he could. I think he's got that potential because of all he can do. I think he's a little bit more of a refined player than Tyreek Hill was when Hill was a rookie. And I know that the reports out of OTAs in Kansas City were pretty good. They said that Mecole Hardman was starting to fit in there. I love the idea of that speed element in this Kansas City offense. You saw how good Patrick Mahomes was chucking it deep. And if this is the guy on the other end of those passes, I want him on my team. And I don't mind risking, I'll say round 8, but I would go as high as late round 7 to get Mecole Hardman.
And I'm just probably not going to get Hardman in any of those drafts if we're taking him in that range there. I do think there is enormous upside because it's Patrick Mahomes. He is very fast. You watch the highlight reel. He makes highlight reel plays like Tyreek Hill. But Hill wasn't very polished when he first came into the league. And Hardman has a lot to overcome. First off, he needs the NFL to actually do something with Tyreek Hill and suspend him. Second, he's going to have to beat out Demarcus Robinson, who's been there and worked with Patrick Mahomes. There's been a lot of buzz actually at camp this week about Byron Pringle, a wide receiver out of Kansas State who got hurt last year before the season. There hasn't been as much buzz about Hardman yet. So I just think he's got a lot to overcome. He may pop at some point during the season. And it's certainly possible if Tyreek Hill is eventually suspended and we start seeing him in training camp work with the ones, then you move them up in the rankings.
Well, we're doing a lot of drafts now, whether it's for magazine publications, for best ball, for just our own purposes for helping our users. Most drafts are going to happen clearly in training camp, and as we get closer to the season. By that point, we will know what Tyreek Hill's status is. At least that's the hope.
I hope so.
The thought would be is that, again, we're advising people, we're ranking this as if Tyreek Hill is going to potentially miss the entire season or the majority of the season. So it's a little bit skewed on where Hardman's average draft position may be now compared to where it may be by the time we actually do have the real drafts and by the time most of you are drafting. So Hardman's ranking, Hardman's ADP will probably run a significant gamut here of the high end of what you're saying and maybe a little bit lower, probably somewhere in between. And then again, we'll see how these other wide receivers for the Chiefs, Watkins, Robinson, Pinckney, how these guys all operate. We know Pringle, excuse me. I wanted to call him Pinckney for no reason. How we know they're all behind Travis Kelce clearly in how this offense will go. The Colts have a new toy as well. They drafted Paris Campbell out of Ohio State. Unfortunately, he is dealing with a nagging injury that is keeping him off the field during practices for them right now. It's allowing guys like Chester Rogers to actually step up. Rogers running with the first team alongside Devin Funchess, who we previously spoke about, as well as T.Y. Hilton. So Campbell is somebody that enters the fray here. Dave, you're the highest on him at 33. I have him at 38. Heath at 48. Campbell has a chance to potentially be a significant rookie wide receiver, but he's number 86 right now on this list. Dave, why are you so optimistic about Paris Campbell?
I think this is the Colts' new slot receiver. I think he's their new high-volume pass catcher, which makes a big difference between PPR versus non-PPR. And I think he can morph into a dangerous number 2 wide receiver, not just for the Colts, but maybe even in fantasy. He's about 6 feet tall, sub 4.4 speed, great hands. He's an improving route runner. He'll never be doubled. And when they drafted him, Frank Reich said it's not going to be fair having him in this offense because of what he'll be able to do in single coverage. And I know that Chris Ballard said that he's not sure when he would pop as an outside receiver. That leads me to believe that he will begin 2019 working in the slot. Not sure how many touchdowns he's going to get, but I think he could get 5 catches per game, and I think he can average in the neighborhood of 12 yards per catch out of the slot right away when you combine the deep targets that he'll get. He did that at Ohio State, along with a lot of those short area catch and runs.
Well, he didn't say just pop as an outside receiver. He said pop in general. I mean,
No, he said pop as an outside.
He said it could be 2 to 3 years before we see the best of what Paris Campbell could have to offer. They're talking about using him in the return game. I'm nervous about Campbell's potential in this offense from his rookie season. Long term, I think he has a chance to be fantastic, but there's so many mouths to feed here. You have the 2 tight ends with Jack Doyle coming back. Obviously, Eric Ebron. You know T.Y. Hilton, what he's going to give you. And then you have Devin Funchess, who they signed, who Frank Reich is also talking up at a very high level and seems to be establishing himself as a starter right away. So Campbell and Hardman, they're in very similar situations. High-octane offenses, great quarterbacks, great play callers. But will they have the chance to maximize their potential as rookies? I think that's the approach you're taking a little bit more.
Yeah, I'm pretty worried about Campbell just because of the situation in Indianapolis, and we know what Andrew Luck does. He spreads the ball around. They target tight ends at one of the highest rates in the league. They target running backs at one of the highest rates in the league. Well, you know what that means for wide receiver targets, and they've got a number 1 wide receiver. It's going to take 120 to 130 plus of those targets. The thing that I really hate, though, is that Campbell is missing this time in the summer.
Yep.
T.Y. Hilton's there, Devin Funchess is there. Like, those guys are getting to work with Andrew Luck. So maybe mid-season there is a point where Campbell becomes that number 2 guy and really takes up those targets, but I don't see it in his rookie year.
And I don't see him starting in 2 receiver sets. I don't think that's going to be the case. I think Funchess is going to establish himself as the starter opposite T.Y. Hilton, and then I do think that you're going to see Hilton also mix and match in the slot, which is going to hurt Campbell in terms of his playing time. And if Chester Rogers continues to play well, again, this isn't a fantasy conversation about Chester Rogers. It's very similar to the Chiefs wide receiver core, why DeMarcus Robinson may not be a fantasy star. Those guys tend to play just because they're established in the offense and the rapport is there with the quarterbacks and the coaches. And that's what hurts some of these rookie wide receivers right away. Second half to the end of the season, these guys could be very good in Campbell and Hardman. Beginning of the season, though, you may struggle with them. And similar to some of the conversations we had about running backs, like Kareem Hunt, for example, you may not want to hold on to these guys on your roster to start the season because they're not making an impact, and you may have to make some decisions, and they may be cut. It could lead to some good waiver wire conversations as we get to the end of the year. Speaking of the Colts, they have another player that we're going to get into when we come back, and that's Eric Ebron, another player dealing with an injury, but certainly coming off a tremendous year in 2018. Will he do the same thing in 2019? Stay right here to CBS Sports HQ and Fantasy Football Today. Welcome back to Fantasy Football Today. We're continuing our top 150 countdown here looking at our top 150 players for 2019 in PPR. I'm Jamie, that's Dave, that's Heath. We already got through 90 to 81, talking about some receivers with some breakout potential, some sleeper potential, depending on how you view this group. And now we're looking at the guys ranked 80 to 71. We'll talk about some of the receivers coming up with our buddy Bryant McFadden. You don't want to miss that. But we're also looking at some tight ends right now. And as you see, some of the second-tier tight ends enter the group here, starting with Eric Ebron. We're going to fast forward a little bit to the list at 70 to 61 and include some of these tight ends. But we'll start with Eric Ebron, coming off of just a tremendous campaign last year. Led all tight ends with 14 total touchdowns. And he was just a star. Some of these guys that we're going to compare him to, O.J. Howard, Hunter Henry, Jared Cook. But Ebron dealing with a groin injury, unable to practice. Jack Doyle coming back from last year's hip injury. They added Devin Funchess. They added Paris Campbell. So guys, you look at Eric Ebron, it feels like this could be, and I know our producer Jack Capotorto is not going to love this, but he could be a bust.
Oh, he scares me to death. If Jack Doyle is healthy, you look at when they played together last year, Doyle played almost twice as many snaps as Eric Ebron did. Doyle averaged more targets than Ebron did. He was below 5 targets per game when those two were on the field together. And even when he was playing without Doyle, it was just a lot of touchdowns. I think you should expect, he scored 13 touchdowns last year. Anything over 7 would be surprising to me this year. And if the targets and yards go down as well, he's a fine late tight end. But unfortunately, in most leagues, because of those touchdowns that he scored last year, you're going to have to take him early. I have no interest.
Do you believe that, I agree, regression's coming. Look at we just got done talking about all the targets in Indianapolis. There's no way that Eric Ebron's going to be able to keep up what he just did. But do you agree? And I like the 7 touchdowns that you said. So cut those touchdowns from last year in half. He had 14 total. If you take away 20% of his receiving stats, he'd have 53 catches, 600 yards, 7 touchdowns. That would have been the number 6 tight end in fantasy.
I take the under on the
year.
catches for sure.
Yeah, I don't like taking him unless it's round 7, round 8. I think that's
you have him ranked 5th.
Earliest.
Like I'm looking at our rankings.
Right, because I'm kind of down on all these other tight ends that aren't the studs.
You see 7 for me and Heath, 5 for Dave. To me, there feels like there's 6 guys that have the chance to be stars. And there's 3 at the top, Kelsey, Ertz, and Kittle. We all know that.
Yep.
4, 5, and 6 for me, and Heath, you have it ranked the same way. Ingram, I'll say we all agree on Ingram has a chance to be fantastic this year because of the loss of Beckham. But O.J. Howard, what he did in the 10 games he played last year, and then Hunter Henry, what he showed us before the ACL tear, I feel like those 6 guys are kind of locked in to be very good, if not great. And then there just feels like there's a drop-off starting with Ebron. That's where you and I have him ranked, Heath, at 7. Again, Dave, you're a little bit higher. So you're expecting him to still be very good, just not great. I just fear that with all these other guys coming back coming into the fold for the Colts, that he's going to lose so much. Plus the fact that he's already battling injuries, which is something that happened to him in Detroit as well. I just feel like the Colts got everything that they could ask for out of Eric Ebron in 2018. Fantasy players did as well.
Right. And
now you're chasing numbers if you're drafting him to do anything close to that. Even the numbers you said, Dave, where he could be the number 6 tight end. It just feels like that would be a little bit of a fluky season. But again, we'll see how Eric Ebron does. Sorry, Jack. I just don't love him as the 5th best tight end off the board. O.J. Howard, however, had a chance last year to really establish himself as a breakout player. And kudos to our podcast host, Adam Azer, who called this before the season, saying that Howard in his second year would be a star. And really, for the most part, he was, aside from the injuries. He's missed 8 games the past 2 seasons, but he had 11 plus PPR points in 7 of the 10 games he was out there. And I think just the concern for me is Bruce Arians has never really featured the tight end in his offense. But he's never had a guy like this. And when he saw him the first time he walked into Tampa Bay's building and got a chance to meet Howard face-to-face, reports apparently where his eyes got big and he was like, hello, which is a great sign because I think you look at it, and Heath, I know you and I are in the same boat on Chris Godwin, that Godwin has a chance to really take advantage of the Humphreys and Jackson targets that are going to be gone. But maybe so does Howard, who's not necessarily, at least the way his physical traits are, the typical tight end that we talked about. He's an athletic freak.
Oh, he's an athletic. He makes it really difficult for me when I do my projections because one of the things I look at is yards per reception. And I don't ever project a tight end for more than 13 or 14 yards per reception because nobody but Gronk does that. Each of the last 2 seasons, 16.6 yards per reception. That's better than what Gronk does.
Right.
And he's catching about 70% of his targets. I do think there's a little bit of risk But when I went back and looked at what Arians did before he had a David Johnson, he never really threw the ball that much to a running back before he had David Johnson either. I think he didn't become one of the smartest offensive coaches in the NFL by changing all the players to do what he wants. He did changes to what he has. And so I expect Howard to be probably the third best fantasy option on this team.
I feel like we've been talking about O.J. Howard's upside for 3 years now because we all saw it when he came out of Alabama, and we know that he's got this great athletic profile. The Bucs in the last 2 seasons just haven't given him that opportunity. He's averaged 3.6 targets per game over the last 2 years, and last year 4.8 targets per game. That's all he needs is that opportunity. And if he gets it in this offense, and there's a lot of mouths to feed in this offense, just not in the running game, then I think he'll be way better than we expect. He's another one of these tight ends that people can draft in that round 7, round 8 range. You're going to say he should go higher than that.
Oh, he's going to go higher. His ADP is
A lot of
going to
these
be
tight ends
higher.
will.
His numbers are going to
And you know what?
higher.
And maybe once we see it in training camp and we see him starting to get that momentum
But
going.
we saw it last year.
We will be there. We saw it last year. It was a different coaching staff. You said it yourself that Bruce Arians hasn't had this great track record with tight ends.
He also didn't have a great track record with David Johnson, too.
It's
with
true,
running backs.
but it's easier to rely on the running back than it is the tight end, especially when you've got Mike Evans and you've
What
got
has
Chris
Jameis
Godwin in
Winston
this
done
offense.
since his college days?
He has leaned on those tight ends, and Cameron Braid is still there. Listen, I don't want to be
Braid
the guy
was
poo-pooing.
non-existent last year, Dave.
He
Braid
got
is
hurt
not a
last year. That's
factor.
why. And then O.J.
If you're
Howard got
counting
hurt
on,
too.
if you're counting
If
on,
he takes away even 20% of the numbers that you're thinking of from O.J. Howard, it's bad news.
if
for
you're
Howard.
counting on Cameron Brate to ruin O.J.
am not
Howard,
counting
you are
on him.
making a sore mistake in
Did I
overlooking
just come
what
up here
O.J.
and
Howard
say that it's going to be Cameron
produced
Braid as
last
the
year?
reason why?
I mean, you're just using it as an excuse.
It's
O.J.
one of many, unfortunately. I want Howard to be great, just like you guys. I'm just not taking him where you're taking him.
Okay. O.J. Howard has a chance to be a fantasy star, should be, as Adam Azer said last year, and I agree with him this year, should be one of the best breakout tight ends in 2019. Let's look now at Hunter Henry, who's coming back from the ACL injury from a year ago. And Henry, unfortunately, only played in the postseason for the Chargers. So we'll see how he does. Before he got hurt in the 2017 campaign, was on pace to be a breakout star as well going into last year. And the Chargers have lost 110 targets for 69 catches, 987 yards, and 7 touchdowns with Tyrell Williams and Antonio Gates, at least for now, gone. So you see the chance here for Henry to be a potential breakout option as well. He comes in at number 85 on this list. Heath, what do you think about Hunter Henry's chances this year to come off that ACL injury and be the star that we were hoping for last year?
I mean, I think he's right there with Ingram and Howard in terms of top 4 upside at the position. What it's going to come down to, and I talk about targets too much probably, but the Chargers did not throw the ball to their tight ends very much at all last year. That's probably because they had the Antonio Gates.
Right.
Yes, they
That's
did.
why.
But they did change their offense, and they threw it to the running backs a lot more than they ever have before. Melvin Gordon and Austin Eckler, and that worked pretty well. So as long as the targets come back and Henry's able to stay healthy, I don't see any other risk with him. He's plenty talented. He's got the connection he's already made with Phillip Rivers. They've got opportunities in the red zone, and he might just hurt Mike Williams a little bit.
And reports are he's been awesome as well. So I think he's going to have the chance to, if he stays healthy, be in the same conversation as a guy like O.J. Howard and certainly, hopefully, Evan Ingram as well, being one of these breakout tight ends.
We've seen Rivers target tight ends at least 119 times each in the previous 5 seasons. And I loved Hunter Henry coming out of Arkansas. We just haven't seen him be any more than a touchdown-dependent tight end. And it bothers me to say that. 8 games in his career, 29 games with over 70 yards. So not even 1 every 3 games. He's getting to that 70-yard mark. You got to count for touchdowns from him. I think he can get close to 7 or 8 touchdowns. I'm worried about the catches being huge and the yardage matching those catches. So if you draft him, do it with the idea that he's got to get a lot of touchdowns for your team.
I think, again, you're looking at 6 guys that have a chance to be very special tight ends. He's at the tail end of that at number 6. A guy that a lot of people are going to look at is Jared Cook, who was a top 5 tight end last year with the Oakland Raiders, had a breakout campaign. We've talked about this with some of the other Raiders receivers, that they had nothing really in this receiving corps to rely on. So this was Derek Carr's go-to guy, and Cook was just amazing last year. You see here 4th in terms of receiving yards at 896. So he goes to New Orleans. They've really struggled to replace Jimmy Graham. Since Graham was traded in the 2015 season, the New Orleans tight ends over this 4-year span have averaged 45 catches, 538 yards, and 3 touchdowns. Now that's Kobe Fleener and Benjamin Watson. Watson did have 1 good season in that 4-game stretch. But we know that Jared Cook, I think everybody's excited. He's getting paired with a Hall of Fame quarterback in Drew Brees. He did play with a Hall of Fame quarterback, at least the guy who projects to be one, in Aaron Rodgers in 2016. And in 10 games with Rodgers, a lot of his production came in the postseason if you're thinking about what he did on the field, some of those highlight plays. But in the regular season, in those 10 games, 30 catches, 377 yards, and 1 touchdown. So Keith, you're the low guy on Cook here. You have him at 10th. Dave, you have him at 7th. I'm at 8th. I'm in the middle. So, Dave, why are you excited about Jared Cook?
I hate recommending this guy for fantasy because he's let us down so many times, but part of the reason why he's let us down is because he hasn't had big opportunities. Last year was the first time he ever had more than 100 targets in the season. Second time he's had at least 90 targets in the season. He had a 67.3% catch rate. That was a career high. He's turning heads at OTAs and training camp now with the New Orleans Saints, and I think he'll be that check down guy for Drew Brees. I think the volume will be there for him, and I think he'll get just enough looks in the end zone to warrant being a top 7 fantasy tight end this year.
So he'll be more of a check down guy than Alvin Kamara?
Well, no, of course Alvin Kamara's going to be there too. But Kamara they use all over the field and they slim out wide. He's a satellite back. There's so many other options.
He broke out in Oakland because they did not have a wide receiver. Like, they just didn't bring any of them back because they were all so terrible last year. And so he got all those targets. Well, now he's on a team with Michael Thomas and Alvin Kamara, and I just don't see him. Like, I think he gets 80 targets. He's fine in that same range. He might be better than Eric Ebron. We'll see. But I don't think he has the opportunity to get to the 90 or 100 targets once again. So I don't think he has anywhere close to the same upside. Plus, he's Jared Cook, and he could turn back into a toad at any moment. Every time we've ever counted on it.
100%. He gives you, a 2-3 game stretch of good production and then a 4-5 game stretch of disappointing production. Ebron and Cook are two guys that I would try to avoid if you potentially can, just because they seem to have maxed out their potential in 2018 and in 2019. I think you're chasing points if you're trying to get those guys. All right, some running backs that we're going to look at in this range as we continue to talk about some of these fantasy options here as we transition to the running back position. It's going to be a real interesting scenario based on average drafters to see how fantasy players draft these guys. We'll start with Darius Geis, 74, Peyton Barber, 77, LaShawn McCoy, 78, Austin Eckler, 84, and Rashad Penny at 88. These are their rankings in terms of their top 150. Geis is the first one that we're looking at, and I was very disappointed to see Jay Gruden's quote sheet yesterday saying that Geis, not at practice, still dealing with rehab from his ACL injury from a year ago. So we don't know exactly what Darius Geis is going to be coming back from that ACL tear. Adrian Peterson apparently said that he wants to try and rush for 2,000 yards this season. Good luck. I think he's 2,000 years old as opposed to 2,000 rushing yards. Plus, they drafted Bryce Love. We don't know what Love's status is going to be coming off his ACL injury in college. So we're all kind of in the same range on Geis here. Heath, your projections for him, your outlook for him, what are your expectations?
It's almost impossible to make one for him because he's an extremely talented running back who, if given the opportunity in a good system, I think could be amongst the top 10 running backs in fantasy. But it's not just Adrian Peterson and Bryce Love. Chris Thompson's still there as well. So I think the problem is he has a very, very low floor. He also, his ceiling is severely limited by the fact that I'm expecting him to share early down work with Adrian Peterson, and he's not going to get the third down work. I've got him projected right now for 884 rushing yards, another 140 through the air, and 7 touchdowns.
I mean, that's generous. That's almost 1,000 yards and 7 touchdowns for Darius Geis. That would be amazing if he had that, and drafting him where we have him ranked would be outstanding. I don't even know if he's going to be able to deliver that much. It's a good situation. The offensive line is fine. The defense in Washington is going to be really good, so there should be a lot of rushing opportunities in Washington this fall. But Heath said it best. It's going to be a split backfield. Chris Thompson's going to take that third down work, and we don't know how healthy he's going to be. So he's a risky pick in the top 100.
Speaking of split backfields, the Tampa Bay situation right now could be very good if one of the guys emerges. It could be very bad if we have a three-headed situation, especially the guy that Heath likes, Bruce Anderson, who's not even in our top 150. If you go back to Monday's show, Heath mentioned Anderson as one of the guys that he felt should be on this list. But you have Peyton Barber coming off of leading the Bucs in rushing yards, rushing production last year. I think a lot of that came by default because he was the last man standing based on some injuries and certainly the failures of what Ronald Jones was as a second-round pick. Jones was number 127 on our list. We talked about him. His ceiling is higher, I think, than anybody of the Tampa Bay backfield. Jameis Winston saying very glowing things about him. But also Bruce Arians seems to like Barber, I think, probably for his, I don't know,
he's a professional.
Safe, right?
Yeah.
He doesn't make mistakes, but he's just not very flashy. So is Barber the type of running back in this range that you just say, okay, I'll settle for him right now, or do you say I'm not even going to take him? I'm rather take Ronald Jones later, or even Bruce Anderson later than that?
And a lot of drafts, Ronald Jones is going before Peyton Barber. So I think you can wait on Peyton Barber. I don't think he's going as early as any of us have him ranked, even Dave at 35. So as of right now, he's a good value. He's not the guy anybody really wants to win this job. Most people want Ronald Jones to win it. I want Bruce Anderson to win it. But he's the guy that's ahead. And he's the guy that doesn't make the mistakes that they don't want to have right now. So I think he's a very good value in drafts. It's just not exciting.
I would like to see Tampa Bay trade for Duke Johnson and maybe add a little bit more excitement to the
Anybody other than these three guys as of now, and we'll see how it unfolds in camp. The one thing I'll say about Barber, he's got that physical profile that Bruce Arians tends to gravitate toward at running back.
LaShawn McCoy comes in at number 78, and I don't think anybody's excited about drafting him either, but at least right now he profiles as the starter for the Bills' backfield. It's a crowded backfield for sure. They signed Frank Gore, they draft Devin Singletary, they signed TJ Yeldon in the offseason as well. And so the way that I would sort of look at this is McCoy's the guy for now. We'll see if Singletary takes over eventually. Gore is the break glass in case of emergency type of guy, and maybe Yeldon plays on passing downs. But I don't think anybody's excited about drafting LaShawn McCoy this season.
I don't think anybody's excited about drafting any Bills running back this season unless it's Devin Singletary late, and then you're just going to wait and see what happens. LaShawn averaged 3.2 yards per carry last year. That's the worst average of his career. Second straight year, his rushing average has declined. His touches also dipped, Jamie. 11.5 carries per game, the lowest since his rookie year. And all of those other running backs coming into the fray will continue to keep McCoy's opportunities low. He's barely in my top 100. I'm probably not going to draft him, period.
I'm going to adjust my rankings pretty much after every day of this show because you guys say really smart things, make me move. Oh, yeah, you're right. I'll move this guy up a little, move this guy down. I just saw that I'm the highest guy on LaShawn McCoy, so I'm going to move him down just to make sure.
You don't want to be that guy.
I want Jamie to have to argue for LaShawn McCoy, not me.
I think I've already moved him down. You know, our top one, a little bit peek behind the scenes. Our top 150 was locked in last week, so we've been adjusting things on the fly as well. The Seattle backfield could be very interesting also because you have Rashad Penny coming into his sophomore year. Didn't do a lot as a rookie based on what the expectations were when he was the number 27 pick in the NFL draft. Chris Carson was a star, but Carson now dealing with a knee injury. The thought would be is that based on Pete Carroll, they're going to have some competition at the position. I think if you're the Seahawks and they're probably asking them to be truthful, they probably want Rashad Penny to win the job.
Oh, yeah.
But Carson was so good for them last year. Can he do it again? Carson's going to be somebody we talk about tomorrow. He's number 43 on the top 150. But again, this knee surgery, who knows? He had this broken leg in 2017 that kept him from playing outside of the first 4 games. Is Penny just the better value of this backfield based on how much Seattle's going to run the ball?
I think so, because look at where you're going to be able to draft him. We're talking about round 7, round 8, one of those priority running back backups that you'll put on your bench and wait to see what happens, or you pair him with Chris Carson and you lock up the Seattle backfield. That's not a bad thing to do either. Penny's got talent. It's just a matter of him putting it together. He couldn't do it last year. He got hurt in training camp, just a total nightmare situation for him. And now it could be a total 180 because Carson's banged up. We'll see how he fares late July. Penny could be the number 1 running back going into the preseason.
Penny showed some things at the end of last year that he had possibly learned from Chris Carson, namely going forward and running hard.
Put your head down.
Yeah. So as long as he continues that, I would expect at some point this season he's going to take the job, but who knows when that'll be.
And even if he doesn't take the job, it could just be frustrating for both these guys. So again, I think you just lean toward the value, and the value here is clearly taking Penny at this spot based on where he's at 88 as opposed to Carson at 43. That's overall our top 150. All right, when we come back, we're going to get into some wide receiver talk with our good buddy Bryant McFadden, 2-time Super Bowl champion, 4-time fantasy football champion, knows a lot about wide receivers. Guys like Alshon Jeffrey, Tyler Lockett, Robbie Anderson, number 1 receivers on their respective teams. Are they number 1 fantasy wide receivers in 2019? Stay right here to Fantasy Football Today, CBS Sports HQ. Welcome back to Fantasy Football Today. We're continuing our top 150 countdown for 2019, our top 150 PPR players. We're talking a lot of wide receivers now, and who better to talk about wide receivers than a man who covers them, or at least used to. 2-time Super Bowl champion Bryant McFadden, 4-time fantasy football champion B-Mac. We know, B-Mac, you know a lot about receivers, a lot about locking them down, but now we're going to talk about what they bring to the fantasy equation. And we're starting with a guy in Will Fuller who, see here at number 73, we're going to talk about a lot of these guys, but Fuller, when he plays, he's a star. 16.7 PPR points on average when he plays with Deshaun Watson. Only played 11 games with Watson over the past 2 seasons. Watson, as we know, was hurt his rookie year, and Fuller coming off last year's torn ACL. Hopefully he'll be healthy and be able to put up a lot of the points that we think will put him in this range. So, B-Mac, I will ask you, why does this guy have a hard time staying healthy? And when he does play, can you trust him to be maybe a starting wide receiver for your fantasy roster?
I think he's just he's not a big wide receiver. He's extremely thin, but yet and still super, super fast, and that has been the biggest issue about Will Fuller when you talk about his production from the reality standpoint and from the fantasy standpoint. But when he is on the football field, he is the ultimate deep threat for Deshaun Watson. They have a nice rhythm. They have a nice relationship as far as taking shots down the football field, and all of that attention offensively goes to the DeAndre Hopkins from opposing defenses. So that allows Will Fuller to have an opportunity to be one-on-one with any cornerback, either the second or the third cornerback, and usually he wins those battles down the football field. But it's about accountability for Will Fuller. Will he be healthy? Will he be able to play 16 regular season ball games? I don't think so. We've yet to see that happen so far in his professional career. I do not expect to see that happen this year. He's more of a boom or bust type of player, potentially a guy you can get in the later rounds.
Brian said it, boom or bust type of player. And normally I'm not this excited about players coming back from a torn ACL, but I love how he fits in with this Houston offense. And it's potent when he's on the field. You talked about how many fantasy points he averages with Deshaun Watson. Even without Deshaun Watson, over the course of his career, 14.7 PPR fantasy points per game last year. 8 of 17 games that he's played with 10 or more in non-PPR, 14 or more in PPR. That's pretty good consistency for a wide receiver that you'll start as a number 3 option. And I love the idea of getting him in round 7 and then pairing him with Kiki QT. And then for those games that Will Fuller misses, you just shift to QT and you put QT in your lineup. You get both of those Texans wide receivers. You've got a starter all season long.
And I think QT makes it really interesting because we've not really seen Deshaun Watson with Hopkins, Fuller, and QT very much. If he has all 3 of those guys for 16 games, Watson may be the best quarterback in fantasy, but it may also hurt Fuller's target share because we did see a couple of games last year where Watson was more willing to dump it off short to a slot receiver than he has been early in his career. He had 2 different games with 11 catches, over 100 yards, and a touchdown. So.
Yes, and QT, another receiver dealing with injuries as well, only played 6 games last year because of his hamstring problems. But if we do get this trio of receivers playing at a high level, will be fun to see, and maybe how it impacts DeAndre Hopkins, who we'll find out in the next couple of days where he slots in our top 150. But we are talking about some of the breakout wide receivers, not the established guys like Hopkins. Let's get to the guys that you really want to know about, and let's talk to a man, again, who knows how to lock them down. So we're looking at the receivers in the 80 to 71 range, and we're talking about guys that have breakout potential. You see here, Robbie Anderson, number 71, D.D. Westbrook, 72. We told you Fuller's at 73, and then following him, Marvin Jones, Geronimo Allison, and Allen Robinson. Brian, I want to talk to you about Geronimo. Didn't also stay healthy last year, only appeared in 4 real healthy games. But we know the Packers and what their receiving core is looking like. They lose Randall Cobb, and they're getting Allison back healthy. They have the young guys. I'm not going to pronounce their names. I always butcher it. But MSV, ESB, Jamon Moore, Jake Kumaro. That foursome is going to try and take Geronimo off the field because we know Devontae Adams isn't moving. What do you like about Geronimo this season?
Well, what I like about Geronimo as far as having a potential breakout year is, number 1, the quarterback he's playing with, Aaron Rodgers. Aaron Rodgers is one of the best quarterbacks in the National Football League. He's also one of the best beer drinkers when it comes to the quarterback position, looking at what he was doing throughout the NBA playoffs at the Milwaukee Bucks game. But in all honesty, he's set up to do good things in Allison. Most importantly for him, it's about being healthy, because if he stayed healthy the entire season in 2018, he would have had a breakout year then. He was on pace to have over 1,000 yards. Like you said, Jamie, only played in 4 games, 19 receptions for 289 yards and 2 touchdowns in that 4-game span. And eventually he had the concussion, and then he was put on IR. I think because of his relationship playing with a top-tier quarterback in Aaron Rodgers, Devontae Adams, they lost Randall Cobb. Didn't really do a lot to add to that position as far as depth at the wide receiver position. Most importantly for Geronimo, if he stays healthy, you better believe he will have a breakout type of year.
You know, I love you, B-Mac, because you and I are on the same page. I think Allison's got breakout potential as well. On pace last year in those 4 healthy games, 76 catches, 1,156 yards, and 8 touchdowns. They're going to put him in the slot at times too, which we know Aaron Rodgers, Matt LaFleur's offense as well. Those guys will help Geronimo, I think, have a big breakout season. I love targeting. The upside is off the charts. Dave, your guy that you're looking at here is Robbie Anderson. I spoke to Pete Prisco yesterday, who was at Jets camp. He said the one thing that Adam Gase told him about Anderson this year is he's not just going to stay to one side. They're going to move him around the offense, and I think that could really help his season this year.
And Anderson wants more targets. He wants to be involved. He wants to be that number 1 wide New York Jets, and he's in a contract here, so it's not a surprise hearing that. Look at the last 4 games from him last season. He averaged almost 10 targets per game, had 3 touchdowns, 336 yards, and he was a top 20 receiver in 2017, and that's regardless of format. Also finished top 20 in consistency that year, so you know that it's in him. He's the type of wide a wide receiver there for another top 20 finish. Like him better than Will Fuller.
And he closed the season on a very high note last year with Sam Darnold, so hopefully that rapport carries over to 2019. D.D. Westbrook is a guy that you like a lot, Heath. The Jaguars' passing offense is going to look different this year, hopefully for the better, getting Nick Foles to replace Blake Bortles. But does the return, hopefully, we know Marquise Lee's still not ready yet, but does the return of Marquise Lee, does the addition of Chris Conley, does maybe a better year coming for DJ Chark make you a little bit nervous about D.D. Westbrook this year?
I think there's going to be a number one wide receiver in this offense. I think right now Westbrook has to be the favorite to be that guy. With the recent reports about Lee's health, yes, Chris Conley has that rapport that he built playing with the backups with Nick Foles in Kansas City for a year. I don't think that's going to translate. Westbrook caught 65% of his passes last year from Blake Bortles and Cody Kessler. You should get a medal for doing that. He'll be much better with Foles. I think he has a chance at 120 targets. And I think legitimately has a chance to be a borderline number 2 wide receiver this season.
B-Mac, of those two guys, Robbie Anderson, D.D. Westbrook, which one has the higher ceiling?
Robbie Anderson. I think we've seen more from Robbie Anderson so far in his career compared to D.D. Westbrook. And also, too, adding Le'Veon Bell to the New York Jets offensive lineup definitely will help Anderson in his development along with Sam Darnold.
All right, let's continue our talk about breakout wide receivers here. Let's look at a couple of other guys that we like. 5 guys in particular that we're talking about breakout potential. Tyler Lockett comes in at 63. Dante Alshon Jeffrey, the veteran, at 67, followed by a couple of young guys in Christian Kirk and Mike Williams. Williams, you could say, may have had a breakout season last year with the 11 touchdowns, but no more Tyrell Williams. Maybe we see Mike Williams do a little bit more in the 2019 campaign. All right, Brian, I want to talk to you about your guy here on this list, and that's Dante Pettis. Had a good 4-game stretch last year. Can that translate to 16 games, especially now that he has some competition from some rookies in Deebo Samuel and Jalen Hurd?
No question it can, Jamie, and here's why. He's a talented player, very versatile wide receiver. He showed the ability to do a lot with less last year. Seeing Jimmy Garoppolo go down with that ACL injury, his production did not drop at all. He finished the season in 9 ball games, 27 receptions for 467 yards, 5 touchdowns, and look at his average per catch. It's right around 17 yards per catch. And another thing that I love about Dante Pettis, his punt return ability. That's an opportunity for fantasy owners who draft Dante Pettis to have dual ways of getting points, receiving the football, catching the football, of course, touchdowns, and also returning football. We saw what he was able to do at Washington. He was a top-tier returner. I expect big things. Just has to stay healthy, but like I said, having C.J. Beathard, Nick Mullins, throw him the football and still give you quality production a year ago, I expect big things now. Garoppolo is once again healthy.
This shows you B-Mac plays in those fun leagues because he's getting special teams points on those return yards as well. Dave, you're also a big fan of Dante Pettis.
I like him a lot, and you talk about Jimmy Garoppolo coming back. That's going to help just the type of target that Pettis gets. And as well, I think he's the number 1 wide receiver for the San Francisco 49ers, and he can line up anywhere. A lot of his work came out wide, especially in those last 5 games when he really started to break out with Nick Mullins late last season. He put on weight. He's closer to 200 pounds than he was last season, and the 5 touchdowns that he had, the most of any 49ers wide receiver since 2014. So I think there's plenty for him. Second season, he's going to make that jump. He is good enough to be a low-end number 2 wide receiver, but you'll draft him as a number 3.
I think that's the better bet just because, again, injuries were also a big problem for him last year. Couldn't stay healthy early in the season, had to finish the season hurt as well. So just stay healthy and maybe the production will follow. I'm excited about Christian Kirk coming into his 2nd season. We saw last year, you want to talk about bad quarterback play. Cardinals did not get great production out of Josh Rosen. Things around him obviously were a big problem as well. Offensive line was terrible. Play calling was terrible. But what do we know about the Cardinals this year? New quarterback, new coach. And I think the air raid system will help Christian Kirk. Look, the Cardinals added guys. You know, you can't get away from adding Akeem Butler and Andy Isabella and expect that Kirk's going to dominate targets, especially with Larry Fitzgerald on the field. But Kirk established himself. He could play inside. He could play outside. I think he's the number 3 receiver that you look at that could also finish as a top 24 type of guy. If you play in 3 receiver leagues, he's one of the more popular guys that you look for with a mid-round pick. You want pieces of this offense, and I think Kirk could eventually become the star. He may not fulfill his full potential, reach his full ceiling until 2020 when Larry Fitzgerald is gone. But I do think that Christian Kirk, and yes, Larry Fitzgerald will be gone. I think Christian Kirk is something upside this season based on that stretch that he showed us last year and scored at least 10 or more PPR points in 6 of his final 10 games. Just stay on the field, had that foot problem that knocked the season. If he stays, a big year ahead for him. What I do like is Tyler Lockett. Did he break out last year? Is there more for him to come now that Doug Baldwin is gone from the Seattle offense?
There almost has to be more for him to come just because of the target situation there in Seattle. Yeah, they're not going to throw the ball very often, but they don't have another proven NFL on this roster. And so you look at what he did last year, basically it was the most efficient year any wide receiver has ever had in NFL history. 81% catch rate while averaging almost 17 yards per reception. He averaged 14 yards per target. That's better than most receivers add per reception. It's not really that much better than what he's done in the past. He's always been a wildly efficient receiver. I do expect he'll see more targets moving inside a little bit more often, but he's still got the ability to take the top off the. You just give him 100 targets with his career efficiency, you're looking at somebody who's once again going to be a top 20 wide receiver.
B-Mac, give me 30 seconds on the Seahawks wide receiver core with Baldwin gone, Metcalf added, and what Tyler Lockett showed us last year.
Yeah, I love Lockett. I think Metcalf is set up to do real good things because Russell Wilson, he's the quarterback, and Russell has been able to do a lot with less. And we didn't really know who Doug Baldwin was. Remember, he was an undrafted free agent, but emerged to be a big-time pass catcher, not just from his individual athleticism, but the quarterback. Quarterbacks really do a lot as far as helping wide receivers. So when you have a top-tier quarterback, you can care less about who the wide receivers are. As long as they can just catch the football and run decent routes, they'll be successful.
Locking down your fantasy knowledge like he locked down those wide receivers in the NFL. Thanks for joining us, B-Mac, and it's always a pleasure to talk to you. We'll catch up with you throughout the course of the offseason, certainly throughout the year. When we come back, we're going to get into what could be a very fun passing attack, the Browns. That's right, the Cleveland Browns. They get Odell Beckham, but we're not talking about him. We're talking Baker Mayfield. We're talking Jarvis Landry. You don't want to miss this. Stay right here to FFT on CBS Sports HQ. Welcome back to Fantasy Football Today. Wrapping up our discussion for today on our Top 150 countdown. We're looking at players 70 to 61 here. Mike Williams, Miles Sanders, Christian Kirk. Some of these guys we already talked about. Dante Pettis, Tyler Lockett. A lot of interesting running backs on this list, which we'll get to. But I want to start with the Browns. One guy on this list, one guy we already kind of mentioned, is Baker Mayfield. You look at Mayfield, comes in at number 81. Jarvis Landry on this list at number 62. We're going to talk about Odell Beckham. We're going to talk about Nick Chubb as we get throughout the week. But looking at these two Browns in particular, start with Baker Mayfield. Gets Odell Beckham. Has the chance to build off what he showed last year when he finally got the opportunity to start. Looked like a very good fantasy quarterback. Now a lot of people expecting him to be great. Can that be the case?
Of course. He averaged over 20 fantasy points per game, just over 20 fantasy points per game last year without Odell Beckham on the field. Now you're going to give him a stud wide receiver to go along with all the other players that he had last season, a good offensive line, a real good run game, and a clever enough play caller in Freddie Kitchens. I think Kitchens proved that. I think you're going to see Baker Mayfield step up, and I've got him ranked as the 6th best fantasy quarterback, and I'm the low guy on him. The debate with me is between him and Matt Ryan. I just think Matt Ryan's been a little more consistent, but I can't deny Mayfield's upside. I also know that I can get Matt Ryan a little bit later in drafts than Baker Mayfield. There will be a rush to get him, so you almost have to believe he's going to be better than a top 5 quarterback if you're taking him in that round 6 range.
So, Heath, Jarvis Landry last year felt like a disappointment. Obviously, the expectations were he leaves Miami, he goes to Cleveland, chance to be the number 1 outside guy as opposed to just being a slot guy. It seemed as if it was a little bit of a failure for him. I don't think you're as excited about him coming back in 2019 to get back to the level he was at. And I just got this stat from our buddy Adam Mazer, who says in the last 4 seasons, Landry has finished between 12 and 22 in non-PPR and between 6 and 19 in PPR all 4 seasons. He's gotten 26 to 28% of his team's targets and has been number 1 on his team's targets each season with at least 41 more targets than the 2nd most targeted player. We don't expect that to be the case now unless Odell Beckham misses time. But how does Beckham help or potentially hurt Landry this year?
I think Beckham could help in that it could push Landry back inside and he could go back to his high efficiency. The problem with that, though, is there's not going to be the huge number of targets. Being a guy that catches 75% of your targets and averages 9.9 yards per catch is not good if you're getting 110 targets. It works if you're getting 150. And what really troubles me is what happened with Landry after Freddie Kitchens took over with Baker Mayfield at quarterback. He was the forgotten man. Less than 7 targets per game, average 56 yards per game, and that was with no Odell Beckham there. So yeah, I'm a little bit worried about him being even a number 3 receiver.
It's going to be fun to see how this Browns offense operates. And again, we'll talk about Beckham as the show moves on throughout the week and see where he sort of slots in. But Landry, I think, is one of those borderline number 2, number 3 receivers that you look at and say, hopefully this Browns offense pops to the level that it could. Heath looking at him as clearly more of a number 3 guy. Dave and I have him on the cusp of a number 2 guy for PPR. Some interesting running backs in this range. I'm going to start with the 49ers backfield. When you look at Tevin Coleman, we've talked about Jarrett McKinnon. Matt Breida was on one of my lists as one of the top 5 guys that should have been in the top 150. It's going to be crowded. Right now you have McKinnon still coming back from that ACL injury. You have Breida dealing with the torn pectoral. Coleman has the history with Kyle Shanahan. The two worked together in Atlanta when Shanahan was the offensive coordinator. Coleman was good last year as the replacement for Devontae Freeman, but I think a lot of people were expecting him to be great, and we'll find out if moving to San Francisco helps him fulfill that potential. You see Coleman here. Heath and I have him ranked at 29th. Dave, you're the high guy on him at 27. Why?
Well, he's been a top 24 running back each of the last 2 seasons, and the combination of his size, his health, his versatility, it makes him the most appealing running back on the 49ers depth chart, and he'll begin the season in a 3-headed mess, but you saw Jarrett McKinnon tear his ACL. We don't know how he'll fare coming back from that, and Matt Breida seemed to get hurt every game he played in. Tevin Coleman could be the last man standing in this backfield, and I will take the last man standing in any Kyle Shanahan coached backfield. In 4 years with Atlanta, 29 total touchdowns, 11 receiving touchdowns. You forget about that element of his game, and he averaged 11 yards per catch, 4.4 yards per carry. The Niners have a good offensive line. I think he's worth a round 5 pick if you're desperate for a running back.
And I'll just say, anybody that I have projected at 29th amongst running backs, if they play 16 games, they're going to finish in the top 24 because at least 5 of those guys are getting hurt in front of them. So I think if he plays 16 games, he probably will be a low-end number 2 running back. The concern I have is that there wasn't a last man standing in San Francisco last year because every time somebody went hurt, they just went with a committee of 2 other guys. And they do still have other bodies on this team. Breida's still there. Mostert's still there.
Jeff Wilson's
still there. And they talked about, with the experience they had last year, they don't want to cut one of those guys because they really think they might need them. So I don't know that there's a situation where enough guys get hurt to where Tevin Coleman's getting 20 touches and has top 12 upside.
And I think it's important to note that Shanahan, when he did have Coleman, did not want to use him as a featured role. He was clearly the number 2 guy, really was pressed into starting duties when Freeman went down, and that's what happened to him last year, even the year before, when Freeman had the concussion and the knee problem. So I don't know if they want to give Tevin Coleman starter workhorse type of carries or touches, especially if both McKinnon and Breida are healthy. They seem to like both of those guys. We'll see how that all shakes out. So I think Coleman a little bit of a risk in the first 5 rounds. I'd rather get him round 6 or later. The Eagles' backfield is going to be interesting to see how it shakes out because they don't typically feature one guy, but it seems like they've been chasing one guy for the last couple of seasons under Doug Peterson. The trade to get Jay Ajayi, trying to make Josh Adams the guy last year, and drafting Miles Sanders this year. Yes, they traded for Jordan Howard, but they talked about the GM there talked about how they really like Miles Sanders as the potential to be their feature back. Now, unfortunately, he's dealing with a hamstring injury right now, which is allowing Jordan Howard to work as this great pass catcher that apparently he's all of a sudden become. Heath, you're a little bit concerned about Miles Sanders, though you have him as the low guy among the 3 of us at 38.
And I do think there's more upside from there, and if he gets there for the start of camp and he's fully healthy and it looks like he's running with the ones, I will move him up. But again, I do get worried about rookies missing time over their first summer and what impact that has on them, at least for the first 4 weeks of the season. I would expect at some point this year you're going to see Miles Sanders as the lead back in Philadelphia, but the lead back in Philadelphia doesn't always mean 250 touches. He still might struggle to see more than 12 to 15 touches a game.
The only thing I'll tell you about Miles Sanders, besides the fact that he's a really good athlete and got great lateral quickness, is that if you draft him in that round 6, round 7 range, you have to be patient with him. Don't cut him after 4 or even 6 weeks. You got to give him a lot of time because I agree with Heath. By the end of the year, he'll be the better Eagles.
Oh, he could be Nick Chubb this year. He could be Sony Michel this year as guys that didn't have to necessarily get off to good starts, but by the end of the year, they were starting fantasy options across the board, no matter the format. And I think Sanders in this offense, great offensive line, great coach, great quarterback. Hopefully Carson Wentz stays healthy. But yes, Sanders has the potential to be a breakout star this year. He's the 3rd of the rookie running backs for a reason. At least now we'll see if Darrell Henderson passes him. But at least he's behind Josh Jacobs. He's behind David Montgomery. This is it. We're going to get to number 1 in our top 150 countdown of our PPR rankings for 2019. You excited?
Of course. I can't wait to see who it is.
I can't wait to see who it is either. I'm Jamie Eisenberg, Dave Richard, that's Heath Cummings. We've been counting down from 150. We thought we were going to go all the way to 1 on Friday. Instead, we're switching it up. We're going 60 to 1 today. Tomorrow, we're going to come back and do a special show, Sleepers, Breakouts, and Busts for 2019. One of our first looks at those 3 respective categories. But right now, we're going to get down to number 1. We're going to start at number 60 and continue the countdown. And when we start here, you're looking at some quarterbacks in this list as we go 60 to 51 to start. Aaron Rodgers, Deshaun Watson, Andrew Luck, and Patrick Mahomes are the four guys we're going to highlight. You see some other running backs and receivers here, as well as Evan Ingram at the tight end position. A lot of people might be looking at this and saying, this is where quarterbacks are going to go? This is where the top four quarterbacks are going to come off the board? I could really wait this long? Probably not going to be very realistic, and I think that's something we should address. Look, we will tell you, you will see it ranked this way. We will advise you, wait on quarterbacks. But Dave, as we know, most people don't wait on quarterbacks.
No, they like to chase the points from last year, and their argument is, well, quarterbacks score more than everybody else, so I'm going to go and take them first. But if you're in a league with 10 managers, 12 managers, even 14 managers, I promise you, there will be a quarterback that you will find later on in your draft. It's a heist. You're stealing him from the rest of your league. You got to go and do that.
I totally
so
agree.
that's why you can't go in round one with Mahomes,
but again,
round two with Rodgers.
Again, the problem with that is that we will say it and say it and say it some more, and yet there is somebody that will always do it. And Heath, if you're getting Patrick Mahomes from 2018, or you're going to get Andrew Luck from 2014, or one of these guys that put up these astronomical type of seasons, Peyton Manning once upon a time, does it just make sense if that's the thing that makes you the most comfortable to just do it?
If you're talking about the Andrew Luck season or most of those number one quarterback seasons besides Patrick Mahomes and Peyton Manning, I think it makes sense to do it in the late second, early third. Now, the problem is you cannot guarantee yourself that you are going to have that type of production from the quarterback, but if you could. Now, when it comes to the Patrick Mahomes season, it's a first-round pick. If we actually thought he was going to do what he did last year, you look at this, he outscored every other quarterback by almost 6 fantasy points per game. It's basically like starting an extra flex each week, having Patrick Mahomes. Now, I don't think Patrick Mahomes is going to repeat what he did last year, but that type of production is worth a first-round pick easily.
All right, let's get into it. So you mentioned Mahomes, and can he do it again, or hard for him maybe to do it again. You see, he's in the top 3 for all of us. Heath, you're still going with him as the number 1 quarterback. We've talked about this a little bit. We have to talk about it again. Tyreek Hill may not play. We don't know exactly what kind of suspension he's going to be facing. We do anticipate some level of a significant suspension. So if it's just Travis Kelce, Sammy Watkins, who hasn't played 16 games since 2014, Mecole Hardman, the guys that they're going to throw out there, Demarcus Robinson, can you really trust Patrick Mahomes to be the number 1 guy again? Or at least why are you trusting him to be the number 1 guy again?
Well, I went and looked trying to figure out how much are we taking off of what Patrick Mahomes did last year. And last year he scored 515 fantasy points in a standard CBS league. If you take 18% of his production, almost a fifth of his production, and just take it away from him, he's still the best quarterback in fantasy. So I'm all for saying he's going to regress. I think he will be a downgrade without Tyreek Hill. But I do believe Patrick Mahomes makes Tyreek Hill more than Tyreek Hill makes Patrick Mahomes.
23% of the catches, 29% of the yards, and 24% of the touchdowns that Patrick Mahomes had last year came from Tyreek Hill. And now Hill's out of the equation. We know that Mecole Hardman might be able to replace a little bit of that. Sammy Watkins.
If he replaces a fourth of it, then we're at the 18%.
Sure, but I don't
it's
even think
not
those
just
two
that,
combined can replace even half.
But it's not just that, though. Sammy Watkins missed 6 games.
Right.
So you're talking about 6 games more of Sammy Watkins. Let's say 4 games more of Sammy Watkins, because 6 games
we're
more.
We're not going to project 16.
So 4 games more of Sammy Watkins, plus Hardman, and plus more from Demarcus Robinson. I mean, look, whoever that person's going to be that's going to step up, whether it's Hardman, whether it's Robinson, combination of both, the other receivers that they have on the roster, somebody is going to give them, I'll say, half of Tyreek Hill.
Sure.
Does that help?
Yeah, it helps, but it doesn't make him the number 1 quarterback.
There's
There's no chance he's repeating what he did last year.
Of course not.
No.
Next to no chance he's even 80% of what he was last year.
I've got him projected for 4,500 yards.
Okay.
Which is 600 yards fewer than last year.
Yeah, it's still
34 touchdowns, which is
big drop. 16 drop.
That's more than 30% less than he had last year.
279 rush yards and 2 touchdowns.
Which is basically on par with what he did a year ago. So, it's a matter of, can Aaron Rodgers, Deshaun Watson, Andrew Luck, some combination of those 3 guys, can they get to those numbers and be better than?
If Mahomes does exactly that, history tells us one of those guys is going to go score 400, because I've got him projected for right at 400 fantasy points. And usually there's 1 or 2 guys that goes over that number. I don't know, if you're asking me, will the field be better than Patrick Mahomes, 1 guy? Probably.
Obviously.
I don't want to bet on one of those guys in a head-to-head matchup over Mahomes.
I struggle with it. I mean, honestly, I'm waiting to see what Tyreek Hill's suspension is. I have no problem if it's not 16 games, moving Mahomes back to 1. And I may do it even without Tyreek Hill, just because I look at Andy Reid, and it's a lot to do with that. It's not Tyreek Hill. It's the combination of Mahomes' skill set plus what Andy Reid has gotten from his quarterbacks over the course of time that make you love what Patrick Mahomes should be able to do, plus just the natural maturation of him. Last year was his first time as a starter, so he's going to understand things a little bit better. And again, he has one of the best tight ends, best receivers in terms of Travis Kelce. I do think Sammy Watkins and Demarcus Robinson and Mecole Hardman and the running backs will help cobble together what Tyreek Hill, not necessarily the same level of what Tyreek Hill left, but hopefully some semblance of what Tyreek Hill's numbers will have to be replaced. Let's look at the other guys here, Luck, Watson, Rodgers. Luck is coming back after the first year back after the shoulder injury and was very good. Not necessarily the guy we were hoping to see, but not far off from it. Got off to the slow start. Dave, you're very excited about him. You have him as your number one.
He was amazing in 2018, and now this offense is adding Paris Campbell in the slot. Devin Funchess all over the formation. Jack Doyle's going to be back and playing more than half the season. The offensive line is the best in football. Marlon Mack's going to be back, and hopefully he stays healthy for 14 games. As Frank Reich said, this is not a fair fight with this offense against any defense in the league. I think he's got the best chance to replicate his numbers from 2018, if not jump close to 5,000 yards and 40 touchdowns. That's the number I'm really looking at with Andrew Luck, is the touchdowns. I think he gets to 40.
I mean, 39 last year is not like he was far off. So
right.
He has easy
he
chance.
He can exceed that. That's
sure.
great.
It should be a fun offense for him. We talked a little bit about this with Deshaun Watson and what this receiving core will potentially do for him if he gets close to 16 games of Will Fuller, close to 16 games of Kiki QT. Fuller coming off the ACL injury last year, as we saw, QT only playing 6 games because of those hamstring problems. Heath, you've mentioned this. We did a draft yesterday with a super flex where the quarterback scoring was 5 points for passing touchdowns. Most leagues will go either 6 or 4. How much does Watson benefit in those formats?
He's my number one quarterback in 5 or 4. He's very close to anything other than 6, and he's very close to Mahomes in 6. If I was going to drop Mahomes out of the number one spot, Deshaun Watson would be my number one quarterback. And I think there's a couple things he can do a little bit better this year than what happened last year. For one thing, and we saw it with Russell Wilson in Seattle, and now he's gone back to it, unfortunately. They really limited his pass volume early in his career, and they did the same thing with Watson. His rookie year, it was less than 30 attempts per game. Last year, it went up 505 attempts. That's still very, very low. I think you could see a small increase, maybe just 15 to 20 attempts, but that'll make a big difference. And the other thing is he was not as efficient running the ball early in the year last year, coming off that ACL, as he was in the second half. If you just give him an extra yard per attempt, that's another 10 fantasy points right there.
Part of that, and I think is interesting to note with him, is he's running for his life because that offensive line was a disaster. Yeah. They added 2 guys this offseason, 3 guys this offseason, Matt Khalil being the veteran, 2 guys in the draft. I don't think they got that much better.
They're not good, but I think they're better.
I just think that it's still something you have to build in with Deshaun Watson, that he's going to take so many hits. The most sacked quarterback last year. It seems like Houston every year they're the most sacked quarterback, from Derek Carr all the way through, from David Carr, all the way through to Watson. And it's a little bit of a concern.
He was sacked once every 8.8 pass attempts, Jamie. It's terrible. And I don't think Matt Khalil is the answer for anything. And the 2 rookies that they got weren't even the high-profile rookie. No. They weren't even necessarily, one of them was a first-round pick. He wasn't even projected to be a first round.
No, they in a lot of cases, a lot of draft pundits felt that they reached for him, and hard to overlook that, just given what it was. So that's something you just have to take into consideration with Watson. But the upside could be immense, again, with that receiving core if all 3 guys stay healthy, along with DeAndre Hopkins. We should probably mention him if we're going to talk about this receiving core. Aaron Rodgers has a same semblance of his receiving core. New head coach, though. Matt LaFleur is now going to be the play caller there, and it's a change. Mike McCarthy was there for 13 seasons, and we've seen this offense kind of get a little stale. I like Rodgers to have a bounce-back season, and I think he could be the number one quarterback. You talk about 40 touchdowns. I think he could be 40-plus, just based on what this offense should be able to do. The thing I like about Rodgers in comparison to these guys is I think Rodgers kind of looks at the landscape and says, I'm pissed. And I talked to Devontae Adams about that, and he said, kind of expect Aaron Rodgers to come out with this chip on his shoulder. As long as he's not in a beer-chugging contest, I think Rodgers has a chance to maybe be better than these guys. But I understand the trepidation. He's older. He hasn't had the same level of success the last couple of years. Last year, battling the injury, broken leg, had the knee problem as well. But I do like the offensive line. I do like the defensive additions. I think that will give him a few more opportunities to touch the ball. So I like Rodgers to be the number one guy. But I think you put all 4 of these guys in a bag, and you're very happy to take either one of them if you're picking them out of the hat, to get one of those guys. Heath, you're the low guy on Rodgers. What's your concern?
The interesting thing is, if you look at, I talk about volume and how many times they're going to throw the ball, but the other thing that goes into that in terms of how many yards they have is yards per attempt. And most of these quarterbacks in the top 3 are right around 7.5, 8 yards per attempt. Rodgers over the last 4 years, just 7.1 yards per attempt. That was average for most of the last decade. That's below average right now, so that's going to have to get better. I also worry just a little bit his pass attempts go down. I think Matt LaFleur would like to run the ball a little bit more than they have in the past.
I think so too. And Jamie, you mentioned this. You could put all 4 of these names in a hat, pick one out, and you'd be happy with them. That's why you wait to get one of them. You want to be the fantasy owner that gets the 4th quarterback off the board on draft day.
I think what we'll see average draft position will probably be Mahomes 1, Luck, Rodgers will split 2, 3. Watson will probably come in at 4, just based on how we're seeing it now. And then as we'll talk obviously throughout the rest of the offseason, Baker Mayfield probably is going to solidify himself as that 5th guy. So it'll be interesting to see how those 5 quarterbacks go on drafts. We know the rookie running backs. They weren't exactly drafted in the NFL draft to the same level that we've seen over guys the last couple of seasons. There was no Saquon Barkley, no Ezekiel Elliott, Leonard Fournette, etc. drafted in terms of the first top 10 overall picks. But Josh Jacobs was a first-round pick in the NFL draft. And then David Montgomery as well is somebody we're going to talk about in this range. Montgomery comes in at 54, and as you're seeing here, as we reveal list 50 through 41, Jacobs comes in at number 41. We're going to talk about a lot of these guys, so as you see the names here on this list, we'll come back to these lists throughout the course of the hour. But when you look at Montgomery and you look at Jacobs, we'll start with Montgomery first. Again, he's 54th in our top 200. Goes to Chicago, has an opportunity to be the lead back there. They do have 2 other guys that could take away significant touches potentially. Tariq Cohen in the pass-catching role, and Mike Davis could also take away some touches from Montgomery as a rusher and receiver. Dave, you're the most excited about Montgomery. You have him actually ranked as a number 2 running back based on the definition of what we do, top 24. Why are you so excited about Montgomery?
Because I think he's going to be the Bears' primary running downs running back, and maybe the primary running back in general. And it's on this stat. Tariq Cohen, 2 years in Chicago. This coaching staff knows exactly what he is. 15 touches in 5 games. 10 touches or less in 16 games. That's half of his games. They don't want to overuse Tariq Cohen. I don't think Mike Davis is going to be the guy that takes most of that other work. It's going to be Montgomery, and he did it in college. He averaged 20.6 carries per game, 2.3 catches per game in the last 2 years, and he had 24 rushing touchdowns in 25 games. You know he's going to work the goal line in this ultra awesome. I don't know, I just made that up off the top of my head. It's not that good. But the Bears' offense is, and David Montgomery is going to be the best running back in it.
I'm not as high on Montgomery as Dave, but I don't think I'm as high on any of the rookie running backs, so I'm just a little bit behind there. I do believe, in terms of what the ADP is likely going to be, and in terms of these rankings here, I think Montgomery is a better value than Jacobs is.
Sure, understandably so. Again, you probably get Montgomery in the round 5 range. You're going to get Jacobs in the round 3 range. As we look at Jacobs goes to the Raiders, the only running back drafted in the first round of the NFL draft in 2019. We'll see where that means for his fantasy value for this coming season. But the Raiders have to replace Marshawn Lynch. They did bring back Doug Martin, but you're looking at it as he was not necessarily a feature back at Alabama. He shared the role with Damian Harris. Didn't necessarily get the number of touches that we see from most Alabama running backs coming into the NFL. Heath, like you said, you're behind on the rookie running backs. You and I are very different in terms of where we view Josh Jacobs. I think Jacobs has the chance to be a top 15 running back this year in either format. You, not so much. What's your concern?
I think he has the chance. There's a few things that concern me. One is the fact that we have not seen him hold up to a big workload. The other is that Jalen Richard is there, and I still expect him to mostly be the third down and passing back. And this is a team that their offensive line is very good. They should open up holes. He should be very efficient running the ball. I think their defense is probably going to be terrible. And so I see them in a lot more pass-heavy games than I do run-heavy games. And that may mean more Jalen Richard on the field in the second half.
It could be. And, we'll see how that sort of, takes away from those guys. But you look at the combination of what Lynch and Martin were able to do. You factor in all 3 guys. He got 17 games of double-digit PPR points from his combination of 3 running backs. I'm talking about John Gruden as the coach there. And that was not with the offensive weaponry that they have with Antonio Brown, Tyrell Williams, and then the addition of Josh Jacobs. So I like what the Raiders are doing, and I do think that Jacobs has the pedigree to be a standout fantasy running back. But I'm with you, Heath, in terms of the value. If you'd rather wait for Montgomery and pass on Jacobs, who we're seeing go really at that 3-4 swing, that's kind of where I think Jacobs is going to end up living from his average draft position, unless he just has a standout preseason, and then we see him skyrocket. But Dave, you're kind of right in the middle here on Jacobs.
I almost think I'm too low on Jacobs because I look at the track record of John Gruden with running backs, and it's really, really good. A running back has at least 40 catches, 9 of 12 years that John Gruden has been calling plays.
Well, 1-0 this year. It's Jalen Richard.
It's not going to. If Jalen Richard is catching 40 passes in this offense, something very bad has happened to Josh Jacobs.
You may catch
it's
more.
not going to happen.
He got 60 plus last year.
He was 7th in the NFL.
I would
running
be
back
shocked if Jalen Richard knocks Josh Jacobs off the field. And Heath, you talk about not having a lot of work in college is a bad thing. He's a running back. That's a great thing. So much tread left on the tire. And the last thing on Gruden, 1,000 total yards to a running back in 10 of 12 seasons. We didn't see it last year because there were some
but the
injuries.
Combination of Martin,
they got a lot of
Lynch
work.
and
Yeah,
Martin.
yeah.
Lynch only played, I believe, 4 games before he had the groin problem, and then Martin took over. It took him a little bit while to get going as well. But by the end of the season, you saw what those two guys were able to do. And we're going to start right now with the list at 40 to 31. And you'll see on this list a lot of potential breakout running backs, some guys that may have already broken out, some guys that have a chance to be re-breakouts. And what I mean by that is guys who once upon a time were fantasy stars, dealing with a little bit of struggles, at least as of last year, and then they bounce back, hopefully, to fantasy prominence. We'll start with 2 guys in particular, Leonard Fournette and Devontae Freeman. Fournette, only 8 games last year because of just injury, poor play, suspension. Freeman only 2 games last year, all of it due to injury, missed 14 games with a groin problem. We'll start with Fournette. I think he's somebody that a lot of fantasy players will be a little bit scared to draft. Dave probably leads that brigade. Heath and I are a little bit more back in on the Leonard Fournette camp, maybe too low, potentially, if he has the chance to do what I think he's capable of doing. So, Dave, I'll start with you. Last year we saw Fournette, was a first-round pick in the majority of leagues, early second-round pick in some formats. You think he should not be taken until probably middle round 3, maybe round 4?
If you can get him in round 4, you're stealing him from the rest of your league. I think round 3 is the perfect time to get him because you already have 2 other studs on your roster already. You mitigate that risk a little bit because I don't think he's a slam dunk to make it 16 games, but he does have a good chance to get double-digit touchdowns and have himself not well over 1,000 total yards, but probably in the 11 to 1150 range, somewhere in there. Underrated pass catcher, and pretty much the only guy. Now, who's going to take work away from him? I know that John DeFilippo talked about, we need to find a 3rd down back. Give me a break. They don't have it. Alfred Blue's not going to be that guy. They don't have anybody like that on the roster. So I see Leonard Fournette as a top 20 type of running back, but not one that I would consider a top 12.
He's not a slam dunk, and there is certainly risk, and that was the one reason I wouldn't take him in the 2nd round. But I think if you look at upside, if he plays 16 games, this team has 105 running back targets available from last year, and Alfred Blue's not taking those targets. Sure. Raquel Armstead's not taking those targets. They're there for Leonard Fournette. If he plays 16 games, I think behind Zeke and Saquon Barkley, he's probably the guy I'd project for the 3rd most touches at the running back position.
Well, 2 years ago when he was great as a rookie, great in terms of his fantasy production, they led the NFL in rushing attempts. Mm-hmm. And I think you look at last year, on top of his failures, you had center, left guard, left tackle, all missed significant time with injuries, all guys back healthy, all guys had the chance to be very good at their respective positions when you compare them to the rest of the NFL. Then they go and add what could have been the best right tackle in the draft in Jawan Taylor, who fell to the 2nd round because of a knee situation. Once upon a time, Jaguars made a great selection with Miles Jack, who had a similar situation, fell to the 2nd round and ended up being one of the better linebackers of that class. So I think this offensive line is going to be better. Quarterback play is going to be better. Fournette has put himself in better shape, spent some time in Wyoming to get himself away from all the distractions, and the team, after saying that they were going to basically get rid of him, is now firmly behind him. So I love this type of player. Has very much Todd Gurley, 3rd year, similar situation written all over it to me. Not to the same level, obviously. He's not going to do that. But Gurley, after a terrible sophomore season, got new coaches around him. Not a new head coach in terms of Fournette, but new offensive coordinator. I think this is going to be a good season for Leonard Fournette. I think he'll be happy to take him end of round 2, beginning of round 3. Devontae Freeman, again, only played in 2 games last year because of injury. Gets a new offensive coordinator as well. Dirk Cutter back in Atlanta. All reports are seemingly that he's healthy. Again, Dave, you're taking a little bit more cautious approach with Freeman compared to myself and Heath. What's the trepidation with Freeman?
Well, he's 27 years old, and he's coming off of a year where he missed 14 games. And I know he looks good in camp now, but I'm not sure the Falcons coaching staff can trust him to handle more than 15 touches per game. Ito Smith is there. Kadri Allison, for whatever that's worth, he's there too. And I know the offensive line got improved. Listen, this would be a much better situation if I didn't think Devontae Freeman was at risk to miss 6+
Do you think he's
games.
fragile?
Yeah, and that's why I just would rather let you guys take him instead of I take him.
He's kind of like
somebody else then.
the uncertainty of Leonard Fournette without the 350 touch upside of Leonard Fournette, but he is in a better offense than Leonard Fournette.
Much better.
And I do think the Falcons will be more run heavy this year, assuming their defense stays healthy. So yes, he's going to share with Ito Smith. I'm not sure Ito Smith's very good. I expect him to get the lion's share, 16, 17 touches a game, and that's enough for him, if he stays healthy, to be a borderline number 1 running back.
And really, he's never been a 25 type of touch type of guy. He's always been kind of in that 18 to 22 range, so a little bit lower, which is why he's in this. Look, we're talking about a guy once upon a time was the number 2 running back in fantasy, was among the top 5 guys when he's been right. So I love, again, these are the type of players that if they hit, you have unbelievable value where they're getting him. And Freeman's going to go probably in the round 4 range. I would say that's where his ADP will settle, unless he has just a dramatic preseason and all these reports are glowing, then he shoots back up. But this offensive line has a chance to be great with the additions that they made. The offense as a whole should be great with the passing attack. I think Devontae Freeman's bounce back potential is through the roof. Some other breakout running backs in this range that we're going to look at. We're going to kind of take a little bit of a take your pick. You're looking at a list of guys here that all have the chance to be top 10 type of running backs if things go right. Aaron Jones, just stay healthy. Kerryon Johnson, same thing. Philip Lindsay, there's a report after dealing with that wrist injury, he's going to be expected to play in training camp or practice in training camp. Marlon Mack, only 13 games last year, and Derrick Henry, it took until the end of the season for him to really fulfill his potential. You see him coming here at the back end of this. I think this will be a little bit different list if we're talking non-PPR compared to PPR. Henry may be at the top of this group, but all 5 of these guys have the chance to be very solid fantasy running backs for your roster this year. I will ask you guys this to take your pick, and we will start with you, Heath. Who's your favorite guy of this 5-some?
I'm going to go with Kerryon Johnson, and every single one of these running backs has enormous upside and some serious warts. So I'm not going to act like Johnson's not without those, but I love his talent. And I love the opportunity on a Lions team that's really talking about running the ball more and running it successfully. He was awesome, averaging 5 yards per carry. Lost too many touchdowns to LeGarrette Blount. I don't expect that to be quite as big a problem in 2019.
I'm going to go with Aaron Jones in Green Bay. Led the NFL last year with 5.5 yards per carry, and the coaching staff is already talking about giving him more work, and he's reportedly in better shape. I guess Aaron Rodgers used to joke with Aaron Jones about having a belly. It's a good thing Aaron Rodgers isn't around me, because he would have jokes at my expense all day long. But Aaron Jones is in shape, and I think he's going to be the lead back in this offense. I see him really reaching his upside. This is the player that I'm going after in round 3 or round 4 to either be my RB1 if I've gone studs at other positions first, or to be my RB2 if I've already got one running back on my squad.
So I just want to ask you, and I'm sure age plays a factor here, but Freeman injury last 2 years. Jones has had a hard time staying healthy the last 2 seasons. MCL injuries both years. Last year he also had a 2-game suspension.
He's actually had 3 MCL injuries in 2 years.
So why not the same concern with him in an offense that may not be as good as what the Falcons offense is?
No, I think it'll be about as good as the Falcons. Look, I like the Falcons offense too. That's why I like Matt Ryan better than Baker Mayfield. But I think that this is going to be a running back that's got upside that we haven't seen yet, and he'll be better than Devontae Freeman when the season ends.
Oh, I don't think that's the case, but I'm just, the injury concern, because both guys coming off of, injury-riddled situations. Do you think it's a must if you draft Aaron Jones to have to get Jamal Williams, assuming that Williams is the backup?
If we're assuming that Williams
Jamal
is the
Williams
backup, yes, but it could be Dexter Williams.
Get one of the Williams.
Got to watch.
One of the Williams. Just take
Draft a Williams.
And
do
again,
it late.
you'll see, we'll talk about it coming up on the 1 o'clock hour of CBS Sports HQ, our Superflex mock draft. Adam Azer, if you want to see on the site, he drafted Aaron Jones. He drafted Jamal Williams. It's something that a lot of people will try and do. It's an easy pairing to make. Yep. And if you want to handcuff those 2 guys, it's probably in your best interest. Jamal Williams has been very good every time Aaron Jones has missed time. I'm going to go with Marlon Mack on this list, mostly because you guys took the 2 top options. I like Marlon Mack's situation, though, because the Colts offensive line should be among the best in the NFL. We saw Marlon Mack last year. Once he finally got healthy and got the job, he had the chance to really take off in this offense, and I think that will be the case again. I'm not worried about Nyheim Hines. I know he says he wants to get 1,000 yards. Good luck with that, buddy. Jordan Wilkins, Spencer Ware, those guys are clear backups. They did not do anything as of yet to address their backfield. The reason I say that is they did bring in Jay Ajayi for a workout in the offseason. It's still something that could happen. If that's the case, obviously we will adjust our rankings to reflect Marlon Mack's maybe downturn in value, but I do think the upside in this offense, if he can play 16 games or at least the 13 that we saw last year, 1,500 total yards is not out of reach for Marlon Mack playing for the Colts. All right, we look at the list now, 30 to 21. The guy at the top of the list, A little bit polarizing. That's Damian Williams. You see the rest of these guys here, a lot of receivers. This is the range. We're going to get a lot of those high-end number 2 receivers, borderline number 1 type of guys. You see the 2 tight ends coming here as well with George Kittle and Zach Ertz. Yes, this is the range where you take one of those 2 tight ends at the back end of round 2. But Damian Williams in round 3, I feel like it's too high. I know, Dave, you like him in this range. Heath, where do you come out on Damian Williams in PPR in terms of the value of where to get him?
I think if you take Damian Williams in round 3 and he plays 16 games this season, it's going to be the best value of any draft pick in fantasy. Because Chiefs running back, combined with what he did in the final 6 games of last year, he's going to be a number 1 running back, and he's probably going to be a top 5 running back. The concern is, does Damian Williams play 16 games for this team? Because we've never
as the feature
seen
guy. He may play 16 games,
right.
But he may not be the feature guy.
I don't think Carlos Hyde, I expect Carlos Hyde's going to take some touches. I don't think Carlos Hyde's going to take the more productive part of this job from Damian Williams.
Unless there's an injury.
Right.
So, right.
And I really think, I'm projecting him for about 18 touches a game, and he's still a top 13 running back just because the efficiency should be off the charts. And if Tyreek Hill doesn't play for the Chiefs, I understand that might make some people think, well, that's going to make it harder for them to run because it doesn't take the top off the defense. I think it just means Williams is more involved in the passing game. He might be more of a monster in PPR. I do think he's one of the players that has the biggest difference between PPR and non-PPR value because he's going to rely a lot on catches.
So, first of all, I love that the coaches are behind this guy, and you've heard offensive coordinator.
But who else would they be behind?
Well, they could have tempered it, and they could have said, well, he's going to be the guy to begin the season. They came out and said he's going to be our starter.
Obvious thing
he's
that
going to
could
be our
possibly
starter.
say.
And he's going to.
I'm glad that they said Patrick Mahomes is their quarterback too. I mean, what else are they going to say?
Of course, they're going to say that about Patrick Mahomes, but they could have gone a little bit less on that because they got Carlos Hyde and they drafted Darwin Thompson. And I'm doing my deep dive on Damian Williams now, and I don't know if he's a great talent at running back. But he's got the opportunity first, and that's what matters the most. And the catches are going to be there for him. And I don't know if he's going to get 15 carries per game very often, because I think Carlos Hyde is going to work that short yardage role. Might even get some touchdowns stolen away from him from Hyde. But I do think Damian Williams does have a good chance to hold on to this job all year long. I will take that risk in late round.
I think he's kind of a super Tariq Cohen, really, because Cohen got 95 carries last year.
170 touches last year.
Right.
Well, yeah, right. I think Williams, again, my concern is I don't know how talented he is compared to the other guys on the roster, a younger maybe version of him in Darwin Thompson, an older, proven guy in Carlos Hyde, and durability. He had the chance to be a starter in Miami when they traded Jay Ajayi, and he couldn't hold up to the workload, got hurt in a shared situation with Kenyon Drake at the time. So I'm just concerned about Williams at his average draft. He's clearly the most talented guy in the opportunity that he has. I don't know if Thompson could be better than him, but I just want to see Damian Williams hold up over the course of the season. I would prefer to get him in round 4. Again, you see where we have him ranked consensus. You see I'm dragging it down a little bit. It may have been higher based on you two guys. So we'll see where Damian Williams goes. If you get him in round 4, I'm happy with it. Round 3, I think, is a little bit too soon.
In 2019, to all the fantasy fans out there that's going to pick me, I love you guys. I appreciate you. I'm going to put up big numbers this year.
I had so much fun doing those at the Super Bowl. We did it about 10 guys. You're going to see a few more coming up in a little bit as we continue our countdown here on Fantasy Football Today on CBS Sports HQ. We're looking at the list 20-11. A lot of these guys, I said, look into the camera, tell us your fantasy future for 2019. They were all pretty cool about doing it. You'll see, again, some of these coming up. I think you'll really enjoy them. Juju Smith-Schuster, we're going to talk about him in a little bit and maybe how he stacks up comparatively to his former teammate in Antonio Brown. But first, let's get to probably the biggest fantasy topic, at least that a lot of people are dealing with now, a little consideration about what to do with Todd Gurley. A little peek behind the mock draft that we did yesterday, the Superflex draft. Gurley fell to round 3 to our buddy Marilyn Berkson. He did the smart thing and took Darrell Henderson in round 7. Getting that backfield is not a bad situation. I know, Heath, you're not a huge proponent of handcuffing, but maybe having the two Rams running backs is a smart thing to do given the uncertainty with Gurley and his knee, and the fact that we're hearing reports that he may not be a bell cow anymore. Very shocking to see him coming in at number 18 for, at least right now, that could change. Maybe we get better reports that bump him back up, or maybe we get worse news and we continue to see the free fall. Where do you come out on Gurley right now, Heath?
This is just a little bit higher than I'd feel comfortable taking him. I think that 2-3 turn is where I'm really considering it. Listen, I still think the most likely situation is what we said at the beginning of the week, and that is that Gurley is going to be a 15-touch-a-game guy. And if he's a 15-touch-a-game guy and he's as efficient as he's been the last 2 years, he's going to make this ranking look silly if he plays 16 games because he's scored touchdowns at a high rate. He's averaged a high yards per carry, high yards per catch. It's a very multiple offense. There's plenty. They can't just focus in on him. but there's an enormous risk now.
Yeah, I'm scared. And I don't like this either. Todd Gurley's been a stud in fantasy circles for a couple of years now. We've seen it, and then there was a year where he wasn't as good. There's no guarantee. He was averaging 22.5 touches per game. Now there's no guarantee he'll even get 17, knock 5 off. So I went back and looked. In 16 career games with 17 or fewer touches, and 7 of these were with Sean McVay as his play caller, he's had below 10 non-PPR points 12 times and below 15 in PPR 13 of the 16 games. So he's human. He needs volume, just like a lot of other running backs do. And if he's not going to participate in minicamp or joint practices or the preseason, then we better hope he gets a lot of work in training camp. And if he doesn't get that, if they hold him out every other day in training camp, I don't know how Todd Gurley's going to reach the expectations, even 75% of the expectations that we might have otherwise had for
It's
him.
a total unknown. It really is, because it could be that he's not going to lose as many touches as we anticipate. Could be he loses 1 or 2. It could be that his knee is a total disaster and he gets put on the PUP list. I mean, there's just such an unknown right now. Thankfully, we're not doing the majority of drafts that a lot of fantasy players are going to do. That's going to happen in August and early September, so you'll have an idea of where Todd Gurley will eventually settle in our rank list in average draft position. But right now, it's just hard to say that he's the same guy, has the opportunity to be the same guy, and that's the fear. Another player in a different set of circumstances is Odell Beckham, who goes from the Giants to the Browns. He's already talking up the arm strength of Baker Mayfield. I don't know if he's taking a shot at Eli Manning, but probably could be construed that way. But Beckham no longer on the Giants, now a member of the Browns after the big offseason trade. And can he be the same fantasy asset that he's been when healthy? Did not finish the last 2 years due to lower leg injuries. Last year missed the final 4 games. The previous year only played in 4 games. So what's the likelihood of Odell Beckham? Dave, you're pretty confident he's going to be a top 5 guy again.
Yep.
What are you basing that on going to Cleveland now?
Well, let's just start with his consistency. Ever since he's entered the NFL, he's been great for fantasy. Double-digit fantasy points in non-PPR, 18-plus in full PPR, at least 2/3 of the time last year, and 62.5% of the time in his last 2 seasons combined. I think his numbers are going to be even better because he's got a better quarterback and he's in a better offense. And this is a situation where Odell Beckham can prove every single week that he's among the best players in the National Football League. I have a tough time deciding between him and Travis Kelce sometimes because Kelce's got that great position scarcity, but Odell Beckham's so consistent and so good. In PPR, he's worth taking toward the back end round 1, especially if other owners drafting in front of you take receivers.
You do mean Kelce? Yeah, I look at Beckham as an early 2nd-round pick. I just think that there are 5 guys that are slightly better than him. I do think that with Landry and Njoku and a strong run game and how Freddie Kitchens wants to operate, we talked about this Baker Mayfield, that the pass attempts came down and they were more focused on just winning games as opposed to putting on this highlight reel. Now, again, that was without Beckham, so we'll see how that sort of goes hand in hand, getting this new talent. But I just think there are a lot of mouths to feed in this offense. And while Beckham has a quarterback upgrade, he's never had this many talented players around him.
Well, and it's not just that. I think the whole scheme of the offense, he's averaged more than 10 targets per game over his career. Nobody was getting close to 10 targets per game in Cleveland last year, and I wouldn't expect that to change in 2019. So I think he'll be very good. He may be even more efficient than he's been in the past. And there's also the fact that he is probably someone you'd have to consider at least a little more of an injury risk than your average wide receiver. He's only played 16 games once. He's only played 15 games twice. So I do think there's a little bit of risk there compared to the other top 5 wide receivers.
I totally agree, but obviously, look, we're splitting hairs. 4th through 7th isn't exactly telling you he's a bad player, but that's why these guys.
Sure, but debating him versus Kelce is something that I think a lot of people
I think
are
it's more than Kelce. It's more about him versus Michael Thomas versus Julio Jones versus the top upper echelon of wide receivers. That's where the conversation I think is really more important, because if you're going to take Kelce, you're going to take Kelce. It's not a matter of who he's comparing him to. You're comparing him to that whole wide receiver group, including one of these guys, and that's Juju Smith-Schuster, who. Now is the number 1 guy in Pittsburgh. Antonio Brown shipped off to Oakland. He wanted out. They gave him the opportunity to leave, and he's now with Derek Carr. And a lot of people may look at this and say, do I really take Juju Smith-Schuster over Antonio Brown? Yes, you do. Juju has a much higher ceiling in his offense with his quarterback than Antonio Brown does. Do you guys share that same sentiment?
I do. And I think both of these guys are going to get a lot of targets, and it comes down to quarterback for me. And Juju Smith-Schuster's got the better one. He's got 2 years' worth of experience in developing rhythm with Ben Roethlisberger. And I think he's a slam dunk for minimum 150 targets. And anytime you've got a chance to get somebody like that, you go up and get him. And I've started my deep dive into Juju Smith-Schuster too. He's not a burner. If we're talking about two guys running a race, AB is going to win every time. But he's so slippery after the catch. Breaks tackles, does a really great job of gaining extra yards after the catch. And I think you're going to continue to benefit from that if you draft Juju. I like him better in PPR than non, but in both formats, he's ahead of AB.
You said a minimum 150 targets, Dave. He had 166 last year
he's
with
going
Antonio Brown on
way
the team.
over 150.
We saw Antonio Brown come close to 200 targets, and I think that's a realistic possibility. I actually have him projected for the most targets in football this season, and I've really struggled with where to rank him. At one point in my projections, I had him as the number 1 wide receiver. The only thing that would keep him from there is how much is the efficiency going to decrease with no Antonio Brown on the other side. Last year, he caught 67% of his targets, about 13 yards per reception. If he maintains those numbers and gets the bump in targets, he's the best receiver in football.
He needs help because I think you're going to see that, and we've seen it time and time again, when you're the 2 and you become the 1, the attention becomes a lot different, and can he get the support on the other side of the field? It doesn't have to be another receiver. It could be Vance McDonald in the tight end group. It could just be the benefit of the run game continuing to be dominant as it's been. But I do think he needs one of James Washington, Dante Moncrief, or Deontay Johnson to step up and help him, much like he's helped Antonio Brown the last 2 seasons. Now, Brown was able to handle the double. He was able to handle the additional attention when he became the number 1 guy. And Roethlisberger is smart enough, as you said, Heath, as the offense coordinator and the coach, and the quarterback, to be able to call the plays that will hopefully get Juju Smith-Schuster in the right situations. But I think entering his 3rd season, the upside is off the charts. He could be the number 1 fantasy receiver by the time the year is over. So there's a lot to like about taking him. I think he's a first-round pick in PPR without question. All right, Antonio Brown, however, more of a 2nd-round pick. I mean, I think that kind of is where he's going to establish himself.
At end of the 2nd for me.
End of the 2nd, so is he not top 15? I mean, I think, you see we all, 8, 7, 8. You're the high guy, Dave. What do you think Antonio Brown could do in Oakland?
I think he's safe for 1,200 yards and 8 touchdowns, which are numbers we're not used to seeing from Antonio Brown. He had a ton of touchdowns last year. The yardage was right around 1,200. But here's what he needs. He needs a lot of targets. He was force-fed quite a bit in Pittsburgh. If he's going to get 150 targets, that's 9.3 per game. I think he'll get close to that in Oakland. He's got a good play caller. We know that that's an important part of Antonio Brown's game. But he also needs a good, accurate, and cool under-pressure quarterback. And I don't think he's got that with Derek Carr. More importantly, I think that the chemistry and rhythm that Brown developed with Big Ben over the years was an instrumental part in Antonio Brown being Mr. Big Chest and getting this contract and having huge numbers and being the most consistent player in fantasy football. And now he's got to do all that with Derek Carr. I don't see it really happening. I think Antonio Brown's going to disappoint you if you take him with a top 20 pick.
Yeah, it's going to be weird to see him go in the back end of the 2nd round, but again, I think that's the right move to make. He may even slip a little bit more than that in non-PPR leagues where you see some of those other running backs get pushed up ahead of him. And again, we won't tell you this, but the quarterbacks are going to go probably at the back end of round 2, at least Patrick Mahomes, based on what the expectation could be. So it'll be fun to see how fantasy players deal with Antonio Brown, Juju Smith-Schuster, but you're hearing us tell you, and I think that will be the case, Juju over Antonio Brown.
Fantasy owners, I just want to let y'all know, please don't let me slip to the 2nd round. This year I heard how I went in the 2nd round and late in the 1st. Man, y'all just come on,
early first. That bother you a little bit?
It bothered me a little bit. Hey, I feel like I've been showing y'all a little love, so I mean, come on, man. I'm going to show y'all love. I'm going to get y'all points. Hey, look, I care about my fantasy.
Being considered probably one of the top guys, it shows that I'm representing myself the right way on the field and off the field, and I guess I'm giving them some fantasy points too while I'm doing it.
Yeah. If you got me on fantasy, you're thinking about getting me on fantasy, or you fired me from your fantasy team, just watch this.
Jamie, where'd you have him, and where do you have him?
He's a top 5 overall pick.
Top 5,
you're in the conversation for number 1 overall.
There you have it. Some of the best in the business breaking down what their fantasy potential should be for 2019. Melvin Gordon, I think it's safe to say he's going to be a first-round pick this year, barring some injury between now and the start of the season. Saquon Barkley is somebody that certainly we're going to talk about in a minute as the potential number 1 overall pick. Same thing with Alvin Kamara. Both guys clearly telling you that they're going to help you, and we'll see if that reflects in how you draft them. So we're down to the top 10. Final list of our top 150 countdown, and let's take a look here at who could be the potential number 1 guy. And there it is. Saquon Barkley comes in at number 1. This is the consensus. Ezekiel Elliott number 2. Alvin Kamara number 3. McCaffrey number 4. And as we're going to talk about in a couple of minutes here, who's number 5? I think we may have some differing opinions about the number 5 guy, but I'll just read the list. Melvin Gordon 6. Julio Jones 7. James Conner 8. Devontae Adams number 9. And there's Michael Thomas at number 10. So let's talk about it here. Number 1 player for us as of now, Saquon Barkley. Does he deserve to be that after just 1 year in the NFL? It was a dominant year. Appears like I'm the only one that thinks so. Not that we're far off, clearly. 2-2 for you two guys. So who's one for you, Heath?
I've got Ezekiel Elliott.
And one for you?
In PPR, it's Alvin Kamara.
Okay, so Barkley, Kamara, and Zeke. And I think that's top 3 for all of us. There's maybe some different orders, clearly. So let's talk about Barkley. Does he have the chance to build off what he did as a rookie? Or maybe we see some drop-off now that there's no Beckham, no real scare in this receiving core in this passing game.
Yeah, he had over 2,000 yards and 15 touchdowns, so I wouldn't expect him to necessarily be
5 yards per carry
this year. The thing that will be interesting is in the second half of last year when Odell Beckham went down, we saw that Barkley's production really kind of suffered just a little bit. And I just wonder if the lack of weapons surrounding him will make things a little bit more difficult. He deserves to be in that conversation for number 1 overall. He was spectacular last year. He's a phenomenal talent. He should be the number 1 pick for sure in Dynasty. The only reason I have Elliott above him is that I'm a little bit more confident in that offense.
Yeah, I get that completely. And I'm certainly confident in Kamara and the offense that he's in New Orleans. And I think that the concern is warranted with Saquon playing without Odell Beckham taking the top off the defense in New York, not to mention the quarterback woes that are there. What do you think defenses are going to do when they line up against the Giants?
Now, when I say concern, he's my number 2 player.
Right.
So it's like, it's not like...
Oh, and listen, look, even without Odell Beckham last year, he averaged 19.8 PPR points per game, so it's not like it's a bad move to take him. But I think Alvin Kamara is just poised to get more work than he's seen before. And I think the Saints offense continues to churn. It's a better offensive line, and he's going to get a lot of catches. And it's just splitting hairs.
I don't know if it's a better offensive line.
It's the New York's offensive line?
Losing Max Unger is going to be huge for that group. Getting Kevin Zeitler for the Giants, it's a big reason. Originally, I had Zeke at number 1. Zeke's number 2 for me. But when they got Zeitler in that trade, I think that's going to make that offensive line just that much better. Plus, Barkley in his second year, I think, just continues to improve. He's such a special talent. I think his role in the passing game will increase even more so than what he did last year. So I love Saquon Barkley's opportunity. Again, Zeke's 2 for me. Kamara's 3 for me. You guys have the same 3 guys in your top 3. Zeke's going to get Travis Frederick back. That's going to be big for him. Another year with Amari Cooper. 70-plus catches last year, first time he's done that. So Zeke has an opportunity to be fantastic. It really comes down to, I think, personal preference. You're going to be fine with any one of those 3 guys. I think you'll be thrilled about it. McCaffrey, really the 4th guy. I think that's pretty easy to establish.
I've got McCaffrey and Kamara pretty close. And I just see it kind of as 2 different groups because I can see Elliott and Barkley getting 370-plus touches.
Right.
I can see McCaffrey and Kamara being right around 300. And that's a big difference.
And their roles in the passing game could be that much, just a little bit incrementally more because they're thought of and used as pass-catching running backs. But McCaffrey, to me, I think is just the 4th guy. I'm a little bit concerned also, Cam, we don't know how healthy he's going to be. So that could really be a little bit cause for concern depending on when you're drafting. Cam seems to be fine. So McCaffrey right now, 4th consensus for all of us. And I think that will be the case as we get closer to the start of the season. But when you move past these 4 guys, then I think there's a little bit more of a discussion about, okay, who's going to be 5th? And so for me, it's the guy that we saw to kick off this segment. It's Melvin Gordon. I just like what he's going to do, his role in the passing game. Consensus, though, it's DeAndre Hopkins. And as you see here, Hopkins 5, Gordon 6, Julio 7, Connor 8, Adams 9. So 5th for you is who?
Mine's actually Connor, and him being ranked 8th tells me he might not be in the top 10 for either of you. So I just think you look at what he did last year. He was the number 6 running back in fantasy last year. He missed 3 games. So the upside in the way this Pittsburgh offense runs, and I do think that Antonio Brown being gone means more targets for him. I think he legitimately has top 5 overall upside and potential.
Connor did finish 6th. Gordon finished 7th. He missed 4 games, and he was the most consistent fantasy running back, at least in non-PPR. And PPR, he was top 3. So I think Melvin Gordon just continues to pick up where he left off. We're not even talking about his rushing average anymore. He sent that through the roof. And I think he's just such a good weapon for that Chargers offense that he's going to continue to play well. And it's not to slight James Conner one bit. I think James Conner should be right back in that Steelers role. The Steelers running back has been a top 10 finisher in fantasy for 4 or 5 years now.
Although the one concern could be, as they've been talking about, and we have to see it first, but at least you see that, it's like we talk about the Rams and they're making efforts to, take work off of Todd Gurley. The Steelers are potentially as well. I mean, bringing in Benny Snell was a little bit of a surprise given what their running back depth chart looks like, but maybe they're concerned about Connor holding up for 16 games. He's got injury concerns back through college, And so does Samuels take on more work? Does Snell take on more work in conjunction with one of those two guys, mostly Samuels probably, but I'm just a little bit concerned about Connor's workload being the same that it was once he took over that job.
That's for sure a concern. I will say the Chargers did that with Melvin Gordon last year.
Yep.
Like his workload went way down.
But he was still successful.
Because he had 14 touchdowns, and I would not expect him to score more touchdowns than he plays games this year.
True, but still, he's been a very good in terms of, outside of his rookie season.
Right.
Touchdowns.
Yeah.
One name that's not on this list, and he does come in at a previous list, I think it's just worth discussing before we get to the receivers. Le'Veon Bell, not in consideration for the top 5 overall picks. Now that he's with the Bills, right? Just consensus no among that group?
Correct.
More of a second-round pick. Let's look at the receivers quickly here. DeAndre Hopkins, Julio Jones, Devontae Adams, those 3 guys. Anyone in this format have the chance? I think we all like Hopkins first in PPR. I like Adams first in non-PPR. But does either one of these 3 guys have the chance to knock off either Gordon or Connor or maybe even McCaffrey or one of the other backs to be first through third in PPR or first through fifth in PPR?
Well, let's just say Julio Jones actually scores as many touchdowns as he should one year. I mean, if he does, he might be the best player in fantasy. You give him 12, 13 touchdowns like Devontae Adams does on a regular basis, with his receiving production, with his yard production, then yeah, he could be the most valuable player in fantasy.
And if you don't have a top 5 pick on draft day, don't curse your luck. These are one of the players that you're going to get in round 1. It's a stud receiver. You're going to start every week. You're going to get great points from them. They're very consistent, and you can come back in round 2 and get a running back. Maybe if you're lucky, Le'Veon Bell is going to be there. If not, somebody like Nick Chubb, Joe Mixon, they could fall to you in round 2. You'll still get that good running back.
And another receiver comes in at number 10, and Michael Thomas, who led the NFL in receptions last year, just another guy that doesn't score many touchdowns, has capped out at 9 touchdowns for his career in terms of a career high over the first 3 seasons of his NFL career so far. Final thoughts, guys, as we wrap up the top 60 players, top 150 overall. Heath, 30 seconds.
We saw a lot more running backs in this show today than we had in the previous days, and I do think it's getting more difficult to go with the 0 running back approach, but it still works if you're at the back half of the first round.
By the time we're in August, David Johnson will be on that top 10 list. He absolutely should be there. He's going to be outstanding in Arizona.
Yep, and David Johnson just outside. He's number 12 right now in our consensus. But, again, it's hard to knock off some of these guys because those top 10 guys are pretty special. Maybe Michael Thomas falls off, and you see David Johnson come in. Tomorrow we're going to get into sleepers, breakouts, and busts. We're going to talk more about the Giants, more about the Jets. We're going to be joined by Pre Prisco, who was at minicamp for both of those teams. Coming up, it's Chris Hassel and Melanie Collins breaking down Game 3 of the NBA Finals. Raptors are up 2-1. And you'll see more of me and Dave breaking down our mock draft. Thanks to Heath, to Dave, I'm Jamie. Thank you for watching.